Does this count, or do you wait till you see him in person?
No, this counts these days. It didn't used to, but now it does.
What's weird is when I got hired at Intel in, I don't know, 2000, I never met the guy who was my boss, like in person. Interviewed, did everything, flew out here. He was in New Mexico office, and I interviewed up here in Portland. And then, I don't know, probably 8 months, 10 months after I was, technically working for him, he visited me at the NBA to see what we were doing. I was like, oh, great to finally meet you. And he's like, what do you mean? We met each other. We know each other pretty well. This is the first time we're seeing each other face to face. So it's like he was so enlightened about it back in 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, Mike, I'm happy to wait for a minute to have Erica join us. But when you think the time's right, I'll call us to order.
All right, sounds good. And
there she is.
Oh, good.
I know Erica has advised us her part of Hillsboro is having intermittent power outages. So if she just drops off suddenly, I'll be prepared to step in.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks, everyone. All
Erica,
right.
we are still missing Lisa, it appears, and
Okay.
we knew about Sheehan.
Okay. Yes, Shannon will be absent today in our meeting. She let us know ahead of time. So we'll just wait a couple minutes for Lisa.
Erica, I just received a text from Lisa, and she will not be able to make it. She's got a sick family member.
Okay. Sounds good.
And if you had fire windstorm on your 2020 bingo card, check that off.
All right.
Well, there's one more on the way, by the way, and that's smoke from the Molalla fire. We're about 100 yards from being completely overtaken by a smoke cloud.
Wow.
It's on your way. It's heading your way.
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah, there's fires nearby here in Washington County. The community of Cherry Grove's been evacuated, and some roads near Stimson Lumber and Scoggins Valley Park was closed. They're actually scooping water with two aircraft to fight the fire out of Hag Lake.
Wow.
Salem, I was down in the Capitol today. Salem is very, very bad. Worse than we were last night. Like right south of Woodburn, it just gets black.
I heard that too, Mark. Yeah. All right, everyone. So let's get started with our board meeting since we have all our board members are going to be in attendance for today. So with that, I'll do our call to order for our Hillsboro School District Board of Directors meeting. And our first item on the agenda is our board self-evaluation. And I believe we have Greg on here too.
Yes, Eric, I'm here. So you want me to go ahead and take over for order here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is a board self-evaluation that we started toward the end. With this 2020 year, I'm not sure when the school year ended and when the next one begins, but sometime during the time around June, July or so, we started a board self-evaluation on a 2-year cycle. We'd done this 2 years ago, and we'd done it a couple of times before that. And we've collected information online from the 7 board members as well as a group of others. And the others include cabinet members and those who on the staff have close connections to the board or see you on a regular basis. And we also reached out to some of your local community leaders to get responses from them. And so this is a report of the information that we collected regarding that. Jordan, if you could scroll to the next page, please, and the next one. So what I've done is a fairly similar format to what you've seen before when we did the superintendent evaluation. And for those who've been on the board a while, we've done the board self-evaluation like this as well. So basically, I've given you a summary at the beginning of what we did, who we collected information from and how we collected it, and the rating scale that we used to score the online questionnaire that each of you responded to. And so this executive summary kind of gives you that methodology. It also shares with you some of my observations, having done this with this board, as Hillsboro boards before. I hope that was of some value, but it seemed to me that when you take a look at the raw information, some trends developed, and I wanted to be sure that I shared those with you. I want to emphasize a couple of things to all of you. One is, if any one of you were to go through all of the information, you might come to different conclusions than I did, but I suspect they'd be somewhat similar, but there might be slight differences. And then the second thing I wanted to emphasize, and I don't want to miss this as we go through looking at details, because often this will get lost in details. This is a very good report, not only from the board members, but also from the staff members and from the community members who did respond. So let's don't lose that as we go through details and try to fine tune some of the issues to identify that could be discussed at a later time. So this is an excellent report. Everybody seems to believe the board is doing a very good job. So kudos to you for that. So I don't want to lose sight of that as we go through and start talking about details. So Jordan, if you could scroll through a page or two more, please. And so this is more methodology, 4-point scale. We shifted to a 4-point scale so we could match up with the same scale we were using for superintendent evaluation. And I've got several attachments that, at least to someone like me, is much more interesting than the actual summary of the information, because the details are, I find them fascinating. So maybe some of you do too, and some of you don't, but I've tried to give it to you in both formats. One is an overarching view, which is here in the executive summary, and then a detailed view, which is the actual raw information that was collected and summarized for you. So can you scroll down again a couple of pages, Jordan, please? I've identified here some areas I want you to be sure you celebrate. From the last board evaluation that we did, several items popped up as areas for improvement. And by and large, this is the same board that was here then. There's a couple of changes, but nonetheless, by and large, it's the same board. But nonetheless, we identified some areas for improvement. And in every one of those areas, improvement was shown from the scores for 2018 until 2020. So that was very good, I thought. Also, there were some notable things that just jumped out at me. I've shared those with you in some bullet pointed items here. And I'm assuming that all of you had a chance to read it, or if you haven't, you'll probably take this home tonight and let you use it for your sleep aid, if you will. So anyway, there's several things that I thought were notables. I think they're all very positive notables, but nonetheless, you can read them, and I won't go through and read them for you. And if you'll scroll on down a little bit more, Jordan, please. Now, a couple of things to, can you scroll back up one page, please? So just a couple of anecdotes that don't show up necessarily here. We had all 7 board members respond. This was version 2, as you may recall. So version 1 didn't have all 7 board members responding, but we had all 7 here for version 2. We also had 9 members of the cabinet and others who are closely connected to the board, so they see you on a regular basis. But those are totally anonymous. I don't even ask for names there, so I don't know who they are or what positions they hold or the role that they play. But we had 9 of them, and I don't know how many had an opportunity to respond. But I've always found that if we have about the same number of staff responding as we have board members, that's a pretty good balance. And so we can then compare what the board's view was versus the staff or others' view to see if there's any disparities or notable differences that should be identified and discussed. So that's one section, which is what did everybody collectively say, and you're going to see that a little bit later. And then I did that so that the board's view was shown on an average basis, and the others, which whoever they may be, but on staff, said comparison, so you could see if there was any differences in the numbers of the averages. So that's how I handle the board and administrative staff.
Greg, you do have a
Yeah.
question here in the comments from Jackie. If cabinet and local leaders are combined in responses.
That's what I was, yes, I'll get to that right now. So cabinet is just those administrators, union leadership. It could be supervisors. I suspect it was probably just cabinet, but I don't know because they didn't identify themselves. And because it's such a small group, we don't ask them to identify themselves so we can maintain anonymity. So that was the, I'll call it the Hillsboro School District groups, board, and then cabinet. We had two other groups that we asked questions from, and that was, one of them was local leaders, and local leaders consisted of two components as it came in to me. As the information came in from this group of local leaders, I broke it up into two groups because it was pretty clear that one set of local leaders were board members from other school districts in your region. And the other group was board or chairs, committee leaders, budget committee members, others who had a real close connection to the district, but were also what we considered local leaders. So I broke the local leaders into two different groups. One was board members, and I called those the externals, and the other was those who were on a committee of some kind with the district, and I called those internal. So when you see the information in the comments, especially, you'll see board member comments mixed with the staff comments. Then you'll also see local board member comments combined or independently of other committee members who were also asked information. We ended up with a total of, I believe, 9 local leaders as well. So we had information from board members, cabinet plus, let's say, and then local leaders. Local leaders didn't fill out the online questionnaire. They had a separate interview form they filled out and returned to me directly, and I compiled the information from the local leaders. But as I said, when I saw the information, it seemed logical to me to disaggregate it into board members who are external to the district, and then others who had some direct connection to the district because they were on a committee of some kind that's an HSD committee. So does that answer your, Becky? Okay. So that's how we captured the information. As I said before, it was really good stuff. In fact, you can see my conclusions there at the end. And I am going to, because it looks pretty small in the view that I'm looking at, I came to a couple of conclusions that I thought were important for you to know. One was that, hang on a second here. So after all of that, overall, the board is highly regarded both internally and externally within the district and those around the district as well, and as well as local leaders. And oh, by the way, all of the external local leaders were other school board members. The board members seem to be harsher critics for their performance than the local or from the staff or the cabinet, and that improvement was shown in areas where you had probably highlighted this and it looked like you had succeeded in doing a better job, at least as everybody has perceived. And then overall, you just did a really good job. So let me go through some of the details and then I'll open it up for questions if you have any questions. But I've tried to then attach the information we collected online in spreadsheet form so that it would be easily summarized. Now, I made an error here, and that was pointed out by one of the board members. And so I'm going to give you why that happened. I'm not going to make an excuse for it. But the first time we did this, we had not all of the board members respond. And so I had combined both the board and the cabinet collectively. So we had a large enough group that people would not be called out. So it maintained anonymity. So I had combined all of the spreadsheet results for both the board and the cabinet together. When we got all 7 board members responding, I had to go back then and redo the entire thing, and it made sense to disaggregate it and split it out into board members on the one hand and cabinet members on the other, because we had a large enough group in each in the sample size that it wouldn't identify who said what unless you said something in the comments that identified yourself. So I didn't go through with all of my headings as thoroughly as I should have. So one of the headings in the worksheet that's got the combined results of both board and cabinet, the first page talks about the ratings or the sample size as being 16 respondents, 7 board plus 9 other. I neglected to carry that heading change all the way through the other standards. So my bad. The numbers, however, I double checked all of the numbers that were the content or the substance of everything there to be sure that when I disaggregated out the second time, I didn't overlook something. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to make sure I didn't mess those up, but I messed up the headings. So what you see in the first set of spreadsheets called overall results is the combined look of how well is this board doing in the standards that you've identified as important and the performance indicators that identify from your board documents and from other district documents and other best practices how school boards should operate and how well you performed. And then alongside of that, I have the comparison to the last time we did it in 2018 and the time we did it before that in 2017, but that was only the board that did it in 2017. Collectively, almost all of the standards on an average basis from overall hovered around the 3.5 out of a 4.0 possible score, which is very, very good. So I didn't get any scores for anybody below developing, didn't get any not meeting the standards. So the vast majority of people rated your performance, including yourselves, as exceeding expectations, or you're proficient at what your performance indicators say. So that's the first set of spreadsheets. The second set of spreadsheets, while I'm on that first set. So Jordan, I'm assuming that people who need to have a copy of this in hand so they can look at it as I'm going through, because the spreadsheets are many pages long and finding one would be a challenge, I think. So let me just talk through, and if somebody has a question, we'll go back and try to find the page. Under standard number 5, we added a new performance indicator, 5.8, that dealt with the district's commitment to increasing the diversity of the workforce and viewing school improvement for students through an equity lens. And so we added that because that wasn't in the earlier versions. And I just wanted to highlight that. Some scores came in that were a little bit surprising because the board rated themselves not doing it as well as they would like to have, but the staff said they seem to think you're doing it pretty well. So something we're going to highlight and talk about a little bit later is the differences in perception. Nonetheless, all of that still came in above 3.0 out of 4, which is proficient at least. Like I said, we're going to talk some details here that sounds like things maybe aren't going well, but the fact is these are really good scores overall for everything. And so everything came in about 3.5 in the combined. If you go to the next set, it's the comparison worksheets where I differentiated the board's view versus the cabinet's view. And I realized the cabinet group may be more than just the cabinet. There may be some confidential in there. There may also be some supervisors in there. I don't know who was included or the roles they play, but they were all leadership positions and they were all closely connected to you. So I call them other in most instances. And you can see how in that second set of spreadsheets, how the differences worked out on an average basis. Now, I do an average because after all, remember, this is the board's performance evaluation, not the individual board members' performance evaluation. So average, at least when we have all 7, is a pretty good way of identifying the combined view of the board members. But you can see from the range of the scores, if there was some particular performance indicator or maybe a board member that ranked or rated something in a way that ought to be discussed. Now, on this comparison view, I did a couple of things a little differently because this is the one to me that is the most helpful in finding issues to talk about. If there was a substantial difference between how the staff, the cabinet, rated a performance indicator compared to how the board rated the performance indicator, and that difference was about 0.5 or more. Now, I say 0.5-ish because if it was 0.45 and it looked like something that ought to be discussed, I highlighted it. If it looked like it was a little bit more, so I used a little journalistic license there, but it was something that had a difference of around 0.5. I highlighted it in blue so that you could see the difference between the board's view and the cabinet's view. There was one item that I highlighted in yellow because the board gave itself a score on an average of less than 3.0, and I highlighted it in yellow just because of that, so you would identify and see that one too. So the purpose for the highlighting was to identify those performance indicators that might be worthy of some discussion as you're planning for your board professional development or your board working agreements for next year going forward. And so that's how I've handled the spreadsheet for comparing both what the board said versus the cabinet. After that, we get into comments, and I just gave them to you. So I went through and tried to be developing. I tried to highlight those back in my executive summary, but having done this a few hundred times, I find that the comments are the most entertaining part that everybody wants to read first and most. And so I just give them to you and let you reach your own conclusions. But as I said, I found a couple of trends in there that I thought worthy of some mention. So I listed those in the executive summary of possibilities for conversation. So I gave you all of what the board members said, simply cut and paste. I gave you what the cabinet said, cut and paste. I also gave you the local leaders, even though I summarized and paraphrased what they had to say, because I did find some common elements in what they were saying. I nonetheless gave you what they had to say as well, because I thought it's important for you to see what the other local leaders around you are saying. So I wanted you to have the benefit of actually reading those comments directly. So a lot of information. Bottom line is really good job. And then I find that a few areas in there could be talked about if you want to plan for next year and what you might do to expand the role of the board members, in parenthesis, in this pandemic environment, which makes it a little more difficult sometimes to do than if we had tried to do this years before. So that's basically an overview of the report, Erica. So let me open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, I'll see if I can answer them.
I think you had just 2 questions in the chat before, but they've been answered.
Okay.
And I don't see any other board members having any questions, but thank you, Greg. This was such a good in-depth assessment, and we got to hear different voices and perspectives, and it's very useful for us. And even I, just looking at our board goals, which is our next item agenda, it's so interesting to see how much things need to change because of how we're currently doing our board service. So this is very helpful for us in figuring out what do we determine that discussion to be, and it's helpful. And Mark has a comment.
Yeah, Mark.
I don't think I'd want to ask the local leaders and stuff or bother cabinet and everybody every year. But I really found a lot of their comments insightful, and I take a lot of information from that to figure out stuff for my personal work for next year. So I'm glad we did it. I don't want to bother them every year, but I think I would like to give a thumbs up for doing it this year. I think it worked out great for us.
So
Mark,
Erica,
Jackie did a little homework on that, and it looks like it's every couple years that we've included the local leaders.
right. I was going to say, we've been on basically a 2-year cycle where we did the equivalent of a 360-degree feedback from some others. In alternate years in between, we've sometimes done board only. and sometimes board only and cabinet, so that you didn't reach out beyond the, the close connected group that sees each other all the time. So your comment's well taken, Mark. That's kind of what we've been doing in the past. And I wanted to share this with you, Erica. I've been working with this board now for how long, Mike? 10 plus years. How long have you been there?
Yeah, about 11, 12 years now. Yeah.
And there have been some different boards included in the group called the Hillsboro School District Board of Directors. And some of the results have been dramatically different than others. I don't know how you all feel about each other, but this is a group that, from an outsider's point of view, seems to work well together. Keep it up. It seems like you're doing a terrific job. The community says you're doing a good job. The people who work closely with you saying you're doing a good job. Local leaders say you're doing a good job. So just keep up the good work. There's always areas to work on and improve, but I've seen some versions of the Hillsboro School District Board that I couldn't say that about. And so I wanted to be sure that you understood that. Good job. Really good job.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay.
Any other other board members? I don't see any more questions.
Thank you again for letting me do this. And if it's okay, I will sign off and see you sometime in the future.
Yes, thank you, Greg.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Our next item on our agenda following our evaluation is the discussion around our board goals.
Hey, Erica, if I could chime in for 1 second. One of the things that kind of the pattern that we've fallen into the last couple of years when it comes to board goals is that the board typically chooses to support the strategic plan goals that the district has laid forward, has put out. And Travis has those and can share those with you just as a reminder. And then oftentimes the board has chosen to have an additional goal or two as well, just as a group. So that's been the pattern that we've fallen into for the last couple of years.
Thanks, Mike and Erica. So this is just a brush up from the retreat in the summer. We had so many slides that I figured that these would be easy for us to just acknowledge and skip over during the retreat, but go ahead and advance one, please, Jordan. Effective school districts have a real tight line between the governance and leadership layer and the classroom and the student experience. So I think Beth's graphic out of our last strategic plan shows that with the concentric circles really well. And so we took this to heart when we did our SIP process. Go ahead, that was well timed, Jordan. And we were real deliberate during our SIA process and our SIP process last year of doing needs assessment, community engagement, identifying problems of practice and root cause analysis, and coming up with theories of action to get to these SMART goals. And go ahead, Jordan. So in our SIP, we have these 12 goals, which is way too many for us to attack all at once, although none of these things is superfluous. Like, these are all really important and core to our mission, but we distilled them down into 4 that we would love you to take a look at as we invest in them this year, especially given the current circumstance. So go ahead and click forward.
Travis,
what is called out?
I was just going to ask what SIP was and if you could explain acronyms on there as well.
Sorry, Erica. Thank you. A continuous improvement plan. Thanks, Mark. So the continuous improvement plan is required by ODE. And they and we have tried to organize all of our grant initiatives and all of our leadership underneath the umbrella of that continuous improvement plan. And it'll be re-upped kind of on a cycle with our reaccreditation. So we're getting on a cycle of doing comprehensive improvement process, using improvement science, and achieving these goals. And so we would love you to consider 3rd grade reading and math, mental and behavioral, direct supports to kids, 9th grade on-track work, continuing, and grad rates. And then for each one of these goals, we do a disaggregation by demographic groups, trying to eliminate opportunity and expectation gaps in our system. And we've taken ground in those areas. So these are equity-driven goals, even though topically they're named reading, mental health, 9th grade on track, and grad rate. These are the indicators we look at when we talk about eliminating opportunity gaps. So with that, I just wanted to bring you back up to speed with that conversation and have it included in what you consider for your goals and areas of focus this year. Thanks.
Thank you, Travis. So I'm looking to our board also to kind of see what your comments or questions, feedback on our district goals, and if that's something that we can still agree and are behind, aside from our own board personal goal that we can discuss shortly after. So I'm looking to see if, unless anybody has anything different or a comment. Okay, getting thumbs up over there. Martin, you have a comment.
So I don't really want to go first. If anybody else wants to go first, that would be preferable, but I don't want to miss an opportunity. So is there anybody who'd like to go first? Okay, well, I'll charge in then. This is my third year now on the board, and the previous 2 years, the first year was, if I were to say, just sum it up real quickly, it's an external focus and an engagement focus that the board had, and that was all collectively agreed upon. The first one was really the bond, and we all met outside of the board meeting and in an advocacy mode when we joined that political action, advocacy team. And we knocked on doors and we engaged with the community, and we really helped the district pass the bond. And then the next year, again, it was very outward looking. And again, it was very deliberate on behalf of the board. We actually had a advocacy subcommittee that was chartered by the board, and we had Beth create things that the board voted on. This is our messaging. And we went down to Salem and we met with PTAs, and we engaged on behalf of the Student Success Act. So my thinking is that we've always been very, very outward looking, and it was a collective board decision to do that. I don't know where the board is. I don't really don't know where my colleagues are at this moment. It doesn't seem, we sort of took an intentional pause to let the state figure out if they were really going to do stable and adequate funding. And I think the jury is very much still out. We were on the cusp of really seeing some Student Success Act dollars, and then the economy tanked for COVID-19. The danger is in us giving the state another year to prove that they're up to the task of stable and adequate funding, is basically the clock runs out on this board and our ability to engage with the community on the issue of stable and adequate funding. I don't think the time is right, but on the other hand, I don't like the idea of just sort of playing the waiting game. And I don't know where the board is collectively. We've got some new members on the board who weren't around for the engagement that we did, certainly on the bond. And I'd just like to see if this board really wants to have an external focus and an over-the-top level of engagement with the community on behalf of something. Maybe it's stable and adequate funding. Maybe it's being anti-racist. That would be my suggestion, is that we, in the update, we saw some effort on the part of OSBA to provide some framework for action at the board level. Two of them I thought fell flat, but one of them really spoke in an action-oriented way, called to be anti-racist. So maybe that's something that we adopt as a board that's external looking, and we continue to engage with the community on becoming anti-racist. That's my thoughts. I guess, again, to bring it back to where I started, an external focus to our board's work, engaging with the community on behalf of HSD.
And just as a follow-up, Martin, and for our district goals, are you okay with that, or did you want to have any feedback on the district ones that Travis presented?
No, I think those are fine. Yeah, it shouldn't go without saying. So that was an oversight on my part. I wholeheartedly support the strategic plan goals.
Thanks, Martin. This is kind of like our board discussion time to talk about our goals. So I'm looking to see our other board members what thoughts or ideas. And for context, if you have in your board packet. But one of the things that I mentioned when Greg was giving us our evaluation was that, for example, one of our previous board goals was to be visible as community leaders, participating in community and district events. Visible and engagement opportunities include, attending a lot of these activities, and that just is something that we're not going to be able to do in the foreseeable future, and being physically present in a lot of these spaces where it was something that we just took on as just almost like a character trait of our board makeup and our work. And now, because of COVID, we have to figure out, reimagine, I guess, so how we do that engagement and participating, if that's still something that is really important to the whole board as a whole that we continue doing, and how can we do that. But just wanting to hear more from our board members on what your thoughts are for our board goals.
I support Martin's idea of somehow moving towards becoming anti-racist. So looking through things, different things through that framework. I also agree that we should advocate for adequate and stable funding. I know given the situation, there's going to be priorities in other areas, but I don't think that we should just kind of just wait there our turn, so to speak, to kind of remind them. So I do think that should be somewhat in there. And then I agree with the district goals that we have set. So I support those. And I'd be interested in looking for other ways to engage community members now that being present physically is not possible right now. So some way to reach our families, whether it's like, I don't know, attending like back to school nights or something like that. I know each school is going to have its own virtual kind of back to school night, seeing if there's ways that we can split it up amongst ourselves to be able to join in those.
Thanks, Yadira. Go ahead, Jackie.
I agree with everything Yadira said and Martin. So we're coming up with two separate sets of goals. One, board goals that pull from and support the strategic plan, the district strategic plan, and board goals that are our goals kind of separately as a board.
Those goals, the strategic plan goals has already, like the ones that Travis shared, those are already our district goals. We're just saying, yes, we want to also support those. And then we have our own as our board work, or our own as a board that we want to work on.
Okay.
Did you have any feedback on those ones, or just?
No, I agree with everything that Yadira said and Martin said. I like the idea of attending the virtual events that the schools have. I think that's one of the best ways we're going to be able to communicate with our families, or at least listen to what they're saying or asking.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I like the idea of attending those, as long as we're not, the third wheel or whatever. At times it felt a little awkward last year, but most of the time it was pretty good. So I think schools enjoy having us around, and if they would like that, I think we should try to do that again. Yeah, I could, and I do think that we do have some in-person opportunities. We just have to do them safely. So I know the bond committee has toured some of the facilities, and I missed that, so I was able to tour it later with Adam. So I mean, there are opportunities for us to do things in person, just do them safely. So I wouldn't want to discount, doing something to celebrate North Plains ES 28, Travis? Casey? 28, 27? 28. All right. ES 28, when the time comes. So I mean, I like figure out a way to be out there in that empty field and stay apart and wear masks.
Thanks, Mark. Martin, you had an idea?
Yeah, we had when we empowered. Well, really, we were all deputized as board members, but we had a subcommittee, and I think we called it an advocacy committee, and we worked with. I think it was 3 of us as board members worked with Beth. We met separately, and then we brought back to the board for adoption an advocacy front back 2-pager that we then went to town with. There's actually a lot of legislative activity. The legislature's meeting quite a bit, and I don't want them to go not hear from us about things like fully funding the Student Success Act. What are they going to do with these other pots of money that don't come to K-12 directly? Are we still talking about QEM? What's it really going to take to get there? There are some legislators who think the Student Success Act achieves a QEM level of funding, and I personally don't think so, but it'd be nice to know if the board, if we could really say that as a district and then send that message. And then of course there's our favorite current service level discussion, that if we don't keep the pressure up, I think that the legislature will drift off the mark there too, potentially. So anyway, to make a long story short, if we really want to advocate, the money for K-12 in Oregon still comes from Salem. And I think we should keep the pressure on them to provide stable and adequate funding and remind them of QEM, and that we've not seen much from the Student Success Act, and basically just be present.
And then also to piggyback on what you're saying, Martin, let them know too that, once kids come back to school, there are going to be some children that are at a severe disadvantage that are going to require more resources in order to catch up to where we're at, and they need to know that.
Thank you, dear.
And I'd like to just, sorry,
I just didn't want to miss Mark had chatted on there, but he'll go next. He'll go next.
Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in. I just want to make sure I totally support what Martin said, especially what Yadira said about the kids when they come back, making sure that we have the funding for the services that they're going to need. I also want to make sure that we don't, I'm going to say spread ourselves too thin. I just want to make sure that we're still working locally as well with our within our schools to make sure that they're getting what they need. Well, also, I mean, it's both very important. Both avenues are very important. I just want to make sure that we don't spread ourselves too thin with what we're doing.
Mark, did you still have a comment?
Yeah, sure. So 2021 will be a long session. It'll be a full legislative session as long as everybody stays in the building for the duration they're supposed to be in the building. And I think traditionally we've had legislative priorities. Is that something we're planning to do again? So like we usually released it. I mean, I can't remember when we haven't released a document saying these are our legislative priorities. So I think we will have an opportunity to address some of these things, right? Is that not the case?
I see Beth nodding. Yes.
All right. So yeah, I mean, like if we at some point we will discuss those specifically, but as part of board goals, having a comprehensive legislative priorities document would be one of them that I would agree with. And when we start to discuss legislative priorities, I would hammer home the CSL conversation. Oh, sorry, CSL. I'll type it in, current service level, and the stable and adequate funding, right? Yeah, it makes sense, right? I think that's a good idea. Just a heads up, the all bill concepts, any concepts that any legislator could bring forward for the 2021 session are due by end of business Friday, September 25th. So at that point, We can advocate for things, and then none of the bills need to be flushed out. But if you have ideas that you are hoping legislators in our districts would bring forward, now's the time to make that plea, because you at least have to get a one line or a small document in there saying I'm going to flush it out later. But after September 25th, there'll be no new concept introduced.
Thanks, Mark. So I was just going to say, I think a lot of what I'm hearing from collectively, and I know we have 2 board members that we definitely need to make sure that we're getting their input and opinion, but maybe drafting something up for them to discuss and kind of review and come up, give us some feedback. But we definitely want to keep the advocacy part of our work. It seems like that's really important for us and something that we want to do in some type of forum regarding funding for public education. So beyond our expanding our legislative work, or also just creating more avenues for us in engaging in this long session would be one of them. Creating, I think as a board, hearing most of you agree with whether we do something more impactful or meaningful behind, our journey into being an anti-racist school district and what that means, and also how do we utilize our platform and our board to push that message out in the community, and how do we also do intentional work around that as a board. So that's something in the social justice area for us that I'm hearing as a board, we want to have something in that area. And then lastly, the engagement and participation in our district in some type of way via the limiting, factors that we have right now. But how do we do that? Or if we're able to do it in public or physically, maintaining those health standards. So I think that's what I'm hearing so far. And then maybe, and that sounds pretty good, around like maybe 3 goals that we can formulate around that. Mike, if that's something that we can start kind of vet around with Sheehan and Lisa also, and filling them in.
Yep, I have the same 3 written down. So we will draft out a set of goals for you to react to for next time around, and we'll include a little bit of detail in there as well, in terms of if the goal is to work towards becoming an anti-racist organization. We'll put some details to that with some selected activities in a roadmap just for you to react to. It'll be a general roadmap, but it'll help get us some details along the way. It's good to see that the CSL guys are coming back for the 2.0 version of the tour in Salem. So I appreciate that. And I think the work that the board did around adequate funding last time around was powerful. I've never seen such political engagement at a crucial time. And I think with the idea that we have $400 million has come out of the Education Stability Fund in order to get us where we are now. We know that the next couple bienniums are going to be crucial when it comes to K-12 funding. So I think that has definitely got to be there. And I mentioned last time that Beth and I have been thinking about alternative methods of community engagement anyway. And so we'll bring some ideas back to you that the board can fully participate in as well. So we'll have something ready for you.
We do have a question here just from Jackie of, do we track our progress from our goals?
We typically the board has reflected on those during the retreat as we start to look forward to the next year.
And I don't know if we have, maybe this might be an opportunity for us, but maybe thinking about, is it in our evaluation? That's what my question was. I think in our evaluation, it does speak a little bit about goals, if I remember, but it doesn't state them specifically. But maybe we can think about if we want to reword a specific question, or actually insert whatever those goals were for this year that we can actually look at. And
I just think it's important that if we have goals, that they're measurable, and that we can say, yes, we did achieve that, mostly, mainly, possibly, I don't know. I'm not saying we have to measure them, just something to follow up and say, these were our goals. How did we do? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can put those directly in the evaluation so that that the board members can have an opportunity for self-reflection on those in a more formal way.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, especially like when we think about activities, there's so much that we do and participate. I think it would be difficult, but I think individually, as we like look at collectively our group and where do we see ourselves showing up and engaging in our community, in our district, and maybe reflect if we felt like we hit the mark or not. But having them specifically called out, that would be great.
Okay.
And you just had a couple questions, scheduling virtual superintendent, and yes, Beth said yes. Her plan. All right. Any other comments on this topic before we move on?
I had a question on our evaluation. There were a couple comments on 5.5 about assessing the district climate. Do we want to talk about that now, or do we want to just make a note of it for next evaluation to maybe reword that a little bit, or if we need to reword it?
Of the question itself, of how it's asked?
Yes. Yeah, it's 5.5. The board regularly assesses the district climate through surveys, focus groups, other methods involving various stakeholders to stay informed. And there are comments about, as a board, we don't assess climate, should we? Should we change the wording? And there was another one about needing more information of what surveys we do, focus groups we host, and on what schedule, and what does regularly mean. So I don't know if we need to talk about it now or just make a note for next time that maybe that one needs clarification. I don't know.
Yeah, Mike, if you could maybe just note that for us. And I think if we're talking about adding some language in our evaluation around our goals and putting them in there, just flag this as another thing to look back on.
You know, what we can do is a couple months prior to the evaluation taking place, we should probably do it sooner than that. We can look at the wording and see if you're happy with the evaluation tool itself and estimates that you would deem appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Our next item on our agenda is our board working agreements. And this is something that we reviewed during our retreat. And we got some feedback on a couple of edits or suggested adding some language on there. So this is just kind of for you all, our board members, to review and make sure that we captured what we talked about and those edits are in there. But if you have any comments or feedback, please let us know.
And Rose, I believe this is on the agenda for our next board meeting for adoption. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So all we would be looking for is if you feel like we captured the essence of our conversation. Majority of it had to do around Erica being able to reach out for help when the board chair is getting a number of questions, or if their personal circumstances are such at any given time that they need help in replying to emails, then this gives the latitude to do that. Some other clarifying language, but for the most part, it's largely the same. Looks like, did Mark have a question?
Yeah, I'm good with the language. Just the section is called and communication and meeting protocols. So I noticed one of the comments and I meant to bring it up. This seems like a good place. In the comments, I think, from the local community was, we often in board meetings say, okay, I'll follow up with that information. The board asked for the information in a public forum, and probably that information is the kind of thing public or other people might want to know. And yet the board updates tend to be confidential. So as we think about how we're communicating data and information, it would be interesting to try to figure out a way for when a board member says, can I get this piece of information? And the cabinet member says, I'll send that in a board update, for that information to be distributed more widely than a confidential board update.
I wonder if just a simple way of doing that would be to refer to it at the next regularly scheduled board meeting, and then and just reference what we found.
Because oftentimes it's just a data point or an aggregated data or disaggregated data or something that doesn't really need to be discussed a ton. It's just information that people want. So yeah, it could even be just in the packet, right? It could be it could just be somehow included so that it's available to people. So people saw us ask the question, people know we got the information, but they don't get to see the information transparently.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't have an answer. It's just, it sparked those comments sparked like, we should figure that out somehow.
Okay.
And I'm looking at our chat, but for the most part, I see Yadira, Jackie, and are good with the updates, and Martin, thumbs up. All right. So, Mike, you have everything you need from us?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to our next one, which is our equity update with Saide and Francesca.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so we have a few things we want to talk about today. We've been moving at full speed ahead with the work that we're doing with equity. And so I'm going to give you just an overview and an update on a couple of the topics that we think you all should know. So the first one is we've been meeting with our equity leadership team, which is made up about 42 administrators, district level administrators, and school-based administrators on all school levels, as well as teachers and classified. And together we've met 3 times. We meet for about 75 to 90 minutes. And we are reading a book study that Saida will tell you about later on. But really working on foundations, connections, and support. We've divided ourselves into 3 teams. And in our teams, we're looking at ways that we can build that foundation for our school district through professional development, through how we're communicating with our stakeholders. In the connections, we talk about different ways that we can connect with all stakeholders so we can elevate voices and connect with all of our families. And in the area of support, how we're curating resources as well as getting that information out to our community, which includes our families and our staff members. It has been an amazing experience to be a part of. Saide and I both sit on them, and just to hear the passionate work that our school leaders and our equity leaders in our district, their commitment towards moving to something better. We've had a big conversation about anti-racism, and it's the fact of understanding that when we talk about an anti-racist system, it's an active journey that we're moving on. And in order to get to that place where we can say we're arriving at the station or we're arriving to that destination, we need to have a comprehensive understanding of what racism is and how it shows up in the system that we work within. And so from that, we have plans to meet next week. We took a pause this week due to our soft start and knowing that our focus had to be on the connections with our students and our families. But we will be meeting every other week for 75 minutes each time we meet. And it's been fabulous. We also have an anti-racist committee. And the committee's group, this group was, we sent it out to all of our staff through OSConnected, and we asked for volunteers based on what we wanted to do with this committee is have them look at all of our assets in it as a district and where there may be recommendations that we can bring forward. So their real job isn't about curating all this information. It's about looking at what we have and finding or identifying the gaps and the holes that we have in this system. We have met 3 times, each for anywhere from 60 to 75 minutes. Again, we're on pause with them and we don't meet with them until 2 weeks from now. This group, when they said they were interested, we got an overwhelming amount of people who were interested in being a part of the committee. And so what we did at that point, knowing that we couldn't facilitate 60 people in a Zoom and get to the real work that we needed to be doing, our principals went back and self-selected at least one person per building because some people had more than just one person. And the groups are all on the same mission. They want to build a better world for our students, with knowing that if we can break down some of these barriers for our marginalized students, that we'll be able to provide for them something better and something that they deserve, which is an education and instruction. And so I look forward to bringing their recommendations forward at a later time. Our anti-racist committee only is meeting for the first part of the year. And then with help from Travis and Saide and Dell and I, the four of us, we will move to see if we, at that time, have enough information from those recommendations to bring us forward with potentially a task force that can work on really finding those resources. But their main goal is just really looking at those recommendations that they can bring to us. And then Saide is going to talk about family engagement.
Thank you, Fran. Yeah, so family engagement. So as you know, the Hillsboro School District is working towards ensuring that the voices within our historically underrepresented and marginalized groups are heard. The Asian and Pacific Islander community is among those groups, and we want to ensure that they are heard, they are valued, they are respected, and we just really want to hear from this community. We want to get their input, and we want to know how we can better serve their children, our students. So we welcome the input given by our community members, and we realize it's essential in the work that we are doing to ensure we're meeting their needs. The Asian and Pacific Islander population currently accounts for about 7%, a little over 7% of our student population. And in addition to that, it doesn't include those individuals, those students that may prefer to use multiple racial identifiers when asked. So it's a fairly large population. That being said, Wednesday, the second Asian Pacific and Pacific Islander family engagement meeting was held with about 50 families in attendance virtually. Francesca, among other district leaders, were in attendance in that meeting, and topics included things such as a review of synergy, an overview of synergy and parent view and online verification, looking at technology as we work through the CDL model, and looking at phone numbers, how to access devices. A lot of this time was spent about looking at our structures and finding out what our families and students really need and want, and also hearing from our families about the concerns that they have with respect to their children's social and emotional well-being, especially in these times, and also their concern about, as we transition eventually towards a hybrid or a traditional model, the notion of them being able to go back and really enjoy and embrace the whole educational experience of what school meant at one point. So it was a very, very valuable and well-attended and meeting with a great deal of information shared on both ends.
And I just want to echo what Saide was saying. Their main concern, it's a concern we're finding in all of our affinity groups, is that parents just really want to know that their kids are going to be okay, that social emotional learning isn't going to go by the wayside. The connections they have with their teachers and their friends is so important to them. And so what we're going to do at the next Asian Pacific Islander group is we're going to bring in some of our resources as a district to talk about different ways we can bring social emotional learning into their homes. And so it's been wonderful. Connor's been a big part of it. That was our third one, and we're meeting at the first week of the month. And so we're really excited about it. We also have affinity groups that meet, and we have affinity groups that identify either as Black, African American, African. And I was able to take part in one of their meetings, and that was for a short amount of time. And that was awesome to see their spirit and how they're trying to form a pack. We also have affinity groups and on a staff level. And so our teachers of color have been meeting with me and have met with Mike to just talk about what they're going through, what their experience is, what their movement forward and what they're wanting to see happen in our district. So it has been a wonderful group of where we meet with the actual team, not with the whole larger group. But the team has been absolutely wonderful with their commitment to HSD, but also their commitment to making this a better place for our students. Book studies, Saide.
Book studies. So book studies are not new to us as educators. However, currently we are part of an ongoing book study to really create our professional and our personal growth as educational leaders. And so over the past months, we meaning our administrative teams, as well as our equity leadership teams, respectively, have participated in a number of book studies. And they've included a couple of books. One, Culturally Responsive School Leadership by Muhammad Khalifa. And this book takes a look at how school leaders can engage students and parents and communities to really promote the essence of learning and education, but do it by honoring the indigenous heritage, local community culture, and their practices. So really weaving in the whole notion of bringing the community in the schools and really getting to know your communities and making sure that their voices are heard, but also in doing so, changing our systems to really meet their needs. So I have it here. This is what it looks like if you're interested. Highly recommended. The next book that we are reading as an equity leadership team is called Not Light But Fire by Matthew R. Kay. And this is this book right here. And this book essentially talks about how educators can really lead meaningful racial conversations in classroom with students. And the whole notion about relationship building, but it just takes it to the next level. It's not the relationship and trust building we know and we've heard of in maybe previous books, but really getting to know the students, taking time to know them as human beings before we get to know them as students. We just started reading that book, but I'm learning a lot from it. And in our discussions as a group, I feel like it is definitely broadening my lens and my view of what it means to be an educator that really embraces and incorporates student voice and allows for student voice in the classroom. And in doing so also allows for the exploration of racialized discussions and discourse in the classroom in a respectful and meaningful way that honors and respects all the students present. Anything, Fran, any additional thoughts about those two books before I?
No. Just talk. The last part is about our professional development.
Okay, so yeah, we're also looking at, we've created a structure around our professional development this year, and we're going through the phases of revising it. But we did hold our all-district equity-focused PD session during in-service week last week, and that was presented to all staff virtually with their building administrators. And the session included some videos, activities. It also included an opportunity for staff to reflect about their students, their classroom, their practices, and ultimately an expectation, an outcome in the form of developing a goal focused on specifically an implementation of equitable practices in the classroom by our educators. So a great deal of kind of information, reflection, and then an action item. Some of the objectives that were set forth from that PD included providing our staff with an overview of what phase one is, AKA year one of our equity plan. Also really reviewing and reflecting on those essential guiding questions that we talk about constantly. So making sure we're asking ourselves whose voice is and isn't represented, who does the decision benefit or burden, is this decision in alignment with our equity policy, and does this decision close or widen the access opportunity or expectation gaps for our students. So there was work around that. They also were able to explore resources and align those resources to equitable practices and around social justice. And ultimately, our goal is to provide something similar to this on a quarterly basis for this school year for all staff. So it's not just something that they're going to see at the beginning of the school year and then forget about, but we're going to revisit this every quarter.
And just one thing to add on to what Saide said was part of what Muhammad Khalifa says is that the basics of starting this all out is that everybody has to have common vocabulary. So when we're saying words like racism, anti-racism, diversity, colorism, we all have to have a common understanding of what those words are together collectively as a group. Because if you're at one building, you define it one way, but the district defines it another way, that's where we're not going to get the system moving together. And we know we've had a wonderful, we're talking about this today, a bunch of cogs moving that are moving great. Our job this year is to move those cogs together so they can move extra special, so they can make that windmill, get that windmill moving. So that I want to put credit to where credit is due in the hard work that Saide and the team have done over the years. This year is about us getting common systemically on the same page.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Saide. I'm looking to our board members and see if there's any additional questions on there. Thank you for commenting the names of the books. I know that we're also at our board level. We got 2 books that were shared for us to do our own work as well. And that's something that we're continuing to do. Martin. You can't say that if you type a comment. Now you got to go.
I apologize to my board colleagues for being too vocal tonight, but I just want to say, Said and Fran, this is so amazing. I'm just electrified by this whole discussion and by your work. I just thank you. It just really resonates with me as a board member, and I would ask, is there anything that you want from us as a board? And I really liked you talking about common language, because we have started talking about being anti-racist, and I don't know that we all are quite on the same sheet of music, and I wouldn't expect us to be unless we really kind of peel that onion back a couple of layers and get to the core. But so I really like the idea of some definitions, and my question to you would be, what would you have us do as a board? Do you need some sort of a sort of opener on this from the board so that everybody in the community understands that the work you're doing is fully endorsed by the board, supported by the board, championed by the board? And I would say in the last update we got, the current update, as a matter of fact, there were 3 examples from OSBA. And the one of them that really came close to being exciting was the one where OSBA was telling the community what they're going to do. And it was very much action oriented, and it was the bolder of the 3 documents because they were speaking on behalf of themselves. And I think probably Erica had a hand in that, and some other members who really pushed OSBA into being proactive, and you could tell it in that document. The other 2 documents were a lot more watered down because they were suggestions for boards statewide to take a look at, and so there are a lot of boards aren't anywhere near where we are, or districts, I should say, anywhere near where we are on this issue, and so those other 2 documents were not exciting to me. But to bring it all back, Fran and Said, if there's anything you would like us to do as a board to kind of do what we can in this area to support the amazing work you're doing, I would ask you to let us know.
think one of the things, Martin, is that we will get to the place where we are able to put down on paper what our next steps are going to be. But right now, Fran and Saida are in the process of gathering information. I think it's a little early to put that document together. But we're getting. I mean, you can hear all of the work that's transpired even just in the last month. And one of my comments recently has been, let's make sure that you're able to complete the year, and we're in this for the long haul. So let's take care of you two as we do this work. So yeah, we will be there soon, where we will have a document and really an opportunity for the board to say we endorse this and this is the plan. We're just not quite there yet.
Thank you, Mark and Mike. And I was looking at Mark's face on the screen. And Saida and Fran and Martin for your comments. I think that that will be an exciting space for us to be in once we're able to have that information as a board, where we can amplify this message and this voice in our community, and also just give a lot of validation and honor in those spaces where we're listening to our historically marginalized communities that haven't had that voice, to know that we are aspiring to be servant leaders and hear them and be in that space, to know that at the highest level of our organization, there is a desire and interest to make sure that their voices are at the table, and that's what guides our work. So I'm really excited that that's where we're headed. And there's just comments on here. Thank you. So we'll move on to our next item on our agenda, which is our Pathway Center update with Mike.
All right, thank you. And Martin, I'm a little jealous. You've never said that you were electrified by my work. Just so far, Fran and Saida. So maybe next year. I'm going to work towards that. That'll be my goal. So, I wanted to revisit the Pathway Center. I know that we've been on pause for a little bit while we were waiting for the money situation to shake itself out. And now that we have that information available to us, we wanted to revisit. Jordan, if you could put that presentation up, that would be great. We wanted to revisit really what our thinking was around this Pathway Center, and then also have an opportunity to talk through the money situation one more time before we press go. But so Jordan is getting that up right now. We've also got our favorite bond guy on this presentation, Adam Stewart, is here, and so he can also answer any questions that we have. So, all right, thanks, Jordan. If you'd advance one. Okay, so we talked last time about how good we feel about the graduation rates that we're currently getting. We also talked about if we wanted to take that next big step and get those grad rates up even further, we're going to have to do something significantly different than we have been doing. So 86.24% is excellent for our district. And if you compared us to other districts that are like us, you would see that pretty clearly. But we're still concerned about the 13.76% of students that are not graduating, and that's where this pathway conversation has come into play. Okay, Jordan, thank you. And just a little bit of background that in January of 2020, so was that 9 months ago now, the board did approve the Pathway Center, and that gave us the opportunity to start costing things out in a more comprehensive way, and to really dive in and take a look at what is that offsite work that was necessary, and what would the programming and just the construction look like to meet the requirements, as well as the city requirements. And we've learned a little bit more about that. I mentioned before that we did have to take a pause, and now we're at a place where we can bring this conversation up again. All right, thanks, Jordan. All right, you see our ninth grade on track, and this is something that is a huge indicator of graduation, is if students are on track at the end of their ninth grade year. And you can see that we are on track to do well with our ninth graders, and this is something that we track very carefully, and we've now expanded that to make sure that 10th graders are on track so that we can maintain that. There's still a percentage of kids, though, that are going to need that intervention, or something different, I should say. This is a slide that we shared before, and the interesting thing about, you'll remember on this slide that one of the most telling things was that once we had kids that had been identified as dropping out and no longer attending on a regular basis, we contacted those kids, and we were able to get a lot of them back, but we weren't able to keep them all, and that was really discouraging, to have a second shot and then to not be able to capitalize on that. That really is one of the things that started this conversation around a Pathway Center, and what would it take to do something entirely different and put programming in place that's going to meet the needs of the kids who really we're not reaching right now. You'll probably remember this graphic as well. There are a number of different programs and a number of different pieces that would roll into the Pathway Center that would give it. We've talked about it as one-stop shopping for our students that need something different besides the comprehensive high school. And this really would be their on-ramp to a program that fits their needs in a more individualized way. All right, we wanted to show you. So one of the things that we've done since getting the approval from the board in January is started to put together some drawings and really more of the scope of the work. So these are just a few pictures of what the facility would look like. Which brings us to the money part. So one of the things that we want to make sure that you understood is that we originally had bond dollars allocated at Miller East. And we felt like we had an opportunity with those bond dollars allocated to recapture some funds that could go towards a facility that we would be in it for the long haul with this facility, and it would meet the needs of students on a campus that has a variety of different options available. We also had this one-time money from Measure 98 at $1.4 million available to us. You'll see down at the bottom there that the total cost of this, though, is $3.6 million. We were able to determine that once we got more comprehensive estimates and once we had a better understanding of the programming and the facility needs for the students, as well as the city requirements. Since this is in a part of town that is going to be very visible, there's also requirements from the city as to what that facility would look like, just the aesthetics of it. So we are in a positive place. The money that we'd originally set aside for Miller Big Picture Savings, there was approximately $2 million left over from that project that was going to be spent on that campus. And so we would be looking at taking $849,000 of that leftover Miller Big Picture campus money and applying that towards this Pathway Center. Really, that is where we are at budget-wise. Adam or Casey, do you have anything to add that I may have left out?
I would just add that the savings that we're looking at there is primarily from the seismic upgrades that we were doing at Miller Big Picture. The original seismic upgrades were based on bringing that building up to current code. And you'll recall that for our older buildings, are focused more on a safe exiting strategy, where we need the building to stay upright enough to get people out, but we're not putting enough money in it to save the structure. So the focus is really on getting people out of the building. So with that decision, we were able to save about $1.8 million in the seismic work that we had planned at, or that we originally budgeted for at the Miller Big Picture campus. And I guess our thinking is that because this is on the Miller Big Picture campus, and the intent really is to serve those alternative students, that it made sense to use those savings to make sure that we could do the Pathway Center the way it needed to be done.
And I would just add too, some of the increased cost was due from the city, is not even on our property. We had some sidewalk improvements. We had to upsize the domestic water line and also improve some street lighting. So those are some additional requirements that the city gave us.
Mark, you had a question?
In your graphic where all the lines go together into the pathway center, HOA is included. So I'm curious what happens with the Peter Bosco HOA current building.
So that's a conversation that we're still having. There is, if I can't see Elaine's face on this particular, on my view right now, but there is a lot of competition for space when it comes to specialized programs. And currently that building is being shared in that manner. So we also envision that it could be that we have that separated out to some degree. So maybe there's an elementary side of thing, maybe there is a secondary side of thing that plays more into the alternative ed campus idea. So one of the reasons I'm hemming and hawing a little bit is because we've seen a big uptick in the number of students that are going to be going to HOA. I believe we're right around 1,000 students right now, and we're usually under 300. And so we're waiting to see what the needs are actually going to be and the number of students that would like to access that programming. So that's why I can't give you a 100% answer right now.
Well, I think some of that is COVID. Some of that uptick is COVID related.
Sure.
We don't build buildings for the temporary COVID situation. So
sure.
What I guess I could call it the bond website. Is there a cliff notes of what was expected to happen at the HOA Peter Bosco building? Probably just look.
There is. There's a list there of the improvements that we have, and it's primarily around HVAC work and not any big improvements to the interior of the building.
Okay. Does the Peter Bosco building already have climate control, have AC?
Not all of it. So that we have done the roofing part of the project, and that was on the old gym. We have some remaining roofing work to do, and then the balance of the work at that building will be next summer.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So really what we're looking for at this point is just a head nod to proceed. Like I said, we had put this on pause until we knew what our funding situation is, and just wanted to bring this back one more time and proceed to carry on.
Did you capture that comment about the sign?
Oh, I'm sorry, I did not see it.
We have a new sign for him. It just hasn't gone up yet.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm looking to our board members to head on. I think
we already approved it.
Martin.
You're just asking.
You did.
If we're,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it all looks good. Okay.
All right.
I'm
We
seeing
will.
head nods.
Okay. Thank you. We will plan on moving forward.
Okay, our next item on here is our curriculum adoption update with Travis.
Thank you. Thanks, Drew. My goal for this one is that the board gets caught up on where we are with our adoption cycle and answer some questions I think that are out there about how we're addressing culturally responsive teaching and anti-racist material in school, and how that relates to our cycle of curriculum adoption, and maybe how we look at resources different into the future. So go ahead and click forward. As you all know, the Division 22 assurances that we submit each year acknowledge that we're out of cycle with the 7-year cycle of adoptions that are proposed by the Oregon Department of Education and supported. And so this is what we tell them, is that due to budget cuts in our prioritization of teachers and professional development over the past decade, and per that requirement by ODE to stay on a 7-year cycle, we are out of compliance in the areas of language arts, health, physical education, social sciences, world languages, and the arts. Go ahead. And we ask for approval to postpone adoption in these areas, even though we keep up with state and national standards. So we've been approved ongoing for postponing adoption in health, physical education, social sciences, world language, and the arts. And we are approved to continue using the materials we have, and we update materials with teacher leaders to provide standards-based materials in these areas, mostly digitally. There's a note here too that since we've had this conversation over the last decade, they've removed arts as no longer one that's supported in a 7-year cycle. Go ahead. And last year, we were denied the request for postponement of our adoption in language arts. However, we were instructed to begin an independent adoption, and we already did for K6, and we'd like to continue with adoption in secondary schools. So thank you to the board for supporting our K6 adoption. That's huge for us, especially as we go into comprehensive distance learning and we have the new Maravillas and Wonders materials. So thank you for that. In our corrective action section, we wrote that we continue to teach to state and national standards at every grade level across content areas. We continue to support the curation and online accessibility of resources for teachers. We've nearly completed an independent adoption of language arts materials for both English language arts and Spanish language arts, which isn't required by ODE, but it is in a dual language district like ours, a priority. And we will complete, this is before we did, in spring of 2020. And we predict that the completion of the 712 adoption would be in spring of 2021. And we can talk about that. We continue to comply with the requirements of the request to postpone those materials. So there's a fancy chart that we keep, thanks to our curriculum leaders for supporting this. In the gray, you see where ODE facilitated an adoption cycle on that 7-year, and then where HSD is in that related to that timeline. And sometimes we're on it and sometimes we're skewed from it. So 2015, Oregon adopted several math curricula that they recommended, hoping that districts could implement that in 2016. And we had completed our K-12 with the high school math adoption in 2015. So we were a little bit ahead of schedule there. In science, we did K-8 in 2017 and high school completed in 2019, bringing us up through the high school level. And then in health and PE, social sciences, world languages, you can see that we requested postponement for adoption. Go ahead and click forward. Now with the language arts and in English and Spanish and our ELD adoption, we are gonna catch up if we're able to pull off an adoption this spring. Right now, with the failure of the SIA dollars to provide the $1.5 million that we had decided was our priority to do that, we're left a little bit in the lurch, and we might have to postpone the secondary addition to the K6 language arts adoption. And then into the future, you can see where math would be on cycle again, science, health, and PE. It just keeps going. And so sometimes we leapfrog into that next round of 7-year adoption and catch on. And sometimes we are in this kind of hold steady pattern. I can say with the open educational resources that we've seen in the last few years, we have a lot more at our fingertips. But I think it's still important for us to do the entire adoption cycle with identifying standards that we need to teach and assess, identifying where our gaps are, identifying the best tools to teach kids, the best instructional practices, and then that professional development that we get into. That's a healthy cycle. And that takes money to facilitate, to get community and teachers together. So our goals for HSD are to create materials that are standards aligned and digital resources increasingly. We need inclusive, accessible instructional materials, both for our students experiencing disabilities and for the diverse learners that we serve. We need culturally responsive, relevant resources, including the integration of ODE's forthcoming curricula. For example, the tribal history, shared history, which isn't just language arts or social studies, it's across the curriculum and supported by the Confederated Tribes of Oregon, specifically for students in Oregon. There's also Holocaust resources coming from ODE that we'll have to integrate as we move forward with curriculum adoption cycles. Integration of diverse perspectives and histories, including anti-racist curriculum materials, and then technology integration and tech-enhanced learning as it becomes available across content areas. The funding situation for us right now includes what we put away each year in the general fund, which is $400,000, and we bank that money, traditionally getting up to $1.2 million after 3 years to do a full K-12 adoption in a given content area. We had allocated 1.5 of our SIA application to curriculum and technology, and we have postponed that based on the estimate that we'll receive only 30% of the SIA allocation. And our bond supported $2.6 million of our K-6 language arts adoption, which is our most expensive. And I'm biased, I'm a language arts guy. I think the most important thing that we do is teaching kids to read, and especially in 2 languages. So thank you for that, for the board's allocation of that from bond dollars. And then the challenges facing us for leadership, which are also opportunities, are that we need to be inclusive, standards-based, and facilitate a democratic process, which we've done traditionally. We need a broad community engagement. We had over 100 community individuals involved in our language arts adoption. We need to prioritize core content and culturally responsive materials, especially given the landscape right now and the predicted gaps that could emerge given the disparity in experiences that students may have during the COVID era. And then we need to focus on our quality process training and implementation. So we don't, even if we had $100 million, we wouldn't go and adopt every curriculum area all at once, because that would be bad practice. We couldn't do these leadership responsibilities effectively if we were adopting every area of curriculum all at once in the next 6 months. So that's one thing that we talk about as we move forward in prioritizing things like language arts and social studies. So these are discussions that are happening right now, and I think this is why I was asked to make this presentation tonight, is the funding situation that we're in. I appreciated the earlier conversation about current service level and advocacy for stable and adequate funding K-12 in Oregon. Also discussing priorities now, our priorities for supporting culturally responsive teaching and learning and anti-racist work in our district. The committee that Francesca alluded to, the anti-racist committee, is assessing where our strengths are, the assets we have out there, and also the gaps in our curricular areas. And we'll be making recommendations on where we should prioritize in order to improve curriculum in HSD. And then we need to continue to refine our roadmap and adapt as situations change. 2 years ago, I couldn't have seen student investment account coming. And then a year ago, I couldn't have seen COVID-19 coming. And so our plans continue to move as the circumstances change. So happy to answer any questions. And I hope that that's an overview that makes you feel like you're up to speed on where we are with the curriculum adoption cycles.
I think, Mark, you had a question.
Yeah, I guess 2 questions now. The physics first, was that part of the high school adoption in 2019?
Yeah, as part of the Portland Metro STEM partnership, we have access to partnerships with Portland Public and Beaverton and Forest Grove, and we've collaborated with them on the patterns approach to physics and biology and chemistry. And so those were homegrown to an extent. I mean, it's curated resources, but a lot of work from local teachers went into the development and sharing of that curriculum.
Okay, second question's a 2-part question. We've traditionally, it looks like, been saving $400,000 until we get to 1.2. For how long have we been doing that? And with inflation and the cost of materials, do we need to consider, do we need to put 500 and it be 1.5 million from here? Like, at what point, for how long have we been doing that? And have we hit the point where inflation is taking our toll on our ability to do that?
I did some research trying to figure out what a reasonable district in modern America would spend per student on a curriculum adoption. And you know what happens is it depends on the area, whether it's math or social studies or music or language arts. And there is research that suggests that the quality of curriculum is super important and a wise return on investment. You'd be wise to invest and get a return on quality curriculum. Quality curriculum doesn't cost a ton more than bad curriculum. That's another thing I learned. But the answer to your second question is, do we need more money? And how long have we been putting away 400 grand? It's been as long as I've been around. And I think that part of the reason that we arrived at the conclusion of 1.5 in our SIA application is that we need more money, and we need to continue to invest more in high quality curriculum, especially as technology and licenses that we pay to publishers grow in cost. About 3 years ago, I was enthusiastic that kids would turn in their backpack full of textbooks and get a Chromebook, and the cost would go way down due to open educational resources and the publishers eventually deciding that they'd give away their materials for free. It never happened. And they're still making a lot of money off of us. So for the foreseeable future, we do need to continue to invest. And I'd say 400,000 is inadequate. I was excited that we got to that 1.5 in our SIA application. I'm hopeful that that comes through.
So 1.2 is just not enough, and 1.5 might be at 500,000 a year.
1.5 was annual, and so if we saw 1.5 come in annually, we could get back on track. And that would we had not at the time said that we would stop putting away 400 grand from the general fund. We would add 1.5 from the student investment account and make huge gains.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You got a comment from Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Travis. This is excellent. I just wanted to share with my colleagues my personal odyssey on this. Probably the vote I am the least happy with as I look back on my 3 years of voting was the first vote I've ever took, was to just routinely acknowledge to ODE that we were not compliant with Division 22 on curriculum updates. And I thought to myself at the time, I ran for the school board and invested all this effort, and my first vote is to vote to defer, curriculum updates. And it just stuck with me. that's not an indictment of anybody or anything. It's just, I'm sharing with you my over time, I've reassessed that vote, and it was most unsatisfying to me to have to take that vote. It was the right vote. I voted affirmatively. That was the right vote at the time. But as I look at that subject, and now particularly through the lens of being an anti-racist institution and through the lenses of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I've circled back around to the really core importance of curriculum, and especially an updated curriculum, because a lot has changed in our culture. And we reflects that. I watched a really good KGW report last month on the Salem Kaiser School District, and this is a quote from Mike's colleague, the superintendent down there, and she said, "With our charge to become a truly anti-racist educators," and she went on to really focus on two areas: curriculum and teachers of color. And I thought, man, this is we're all thinking the same thing. Our staff needs to reflect the community that we serve, and our curriculum needs to be updated. So fast forward it to this discussion here, discuss funding. It was an epiphany to me that we could use bond funding, and we did. This board did, and this district did. And I'm thinking, we're getting towards the end of the bond, and we're looking at all the successes and the commitments to the community that we've fulfilled. And when we get to the end of that list, I would suggest to this board and to the leaders assembled here that we take a look at an additional investment in curriculum with any remaining bond funds as perhaps worthy of consideration. Thank you, Erica.
Thanks, Mark. Any other comments or questions? I'm not seeing any. Yes, just a comment from Jackie on there that she also felt the same way. I think all of us, it was one of our, a lot of first timers here being on the board and understanding that. And I remember one comment that you made, Travis, back then, and even was, even we don't have some of those materials, there's a lot of work that our teachers do. And there's a lot of materials that get curated that, may not be through the traditional way, but that we try to stay relevant and make sure up to date. So it's still not an easy vote, and not something that we take lightly. Thank you for that presentation and information.
Eric, if I could just ask a clarifying question there, as we begin to wrap up the bond, we will have, and we're not there yet. We've got a couple schools left to build, but there will be an opportunity for us to revisit and have a conversation on how that bond premium is spent. We do, if you remember, in our planning process, before we ever got started, we did generate a list of things that would be nice also to accomplish. It doesn't mean that it was a guarantee that that's how the money was going to get spent. And just know that we will have an opportunity to revisit, and the board will obviously need to weigh in pretty heavily on how that money is spent and what it's prioritized for. So there will be a conversation for more. There'll be an opportunity for more conversation on this.
Thanks, Mike. All right, moving on to our next item is facilities naming process.
All right. I will take that one, and then I'll have Casey chime in a little bit as well. But we're at the point where, as you know, we are looking to name ES 28, elementary school number 28, which is going to be the new school over in North Plains. And you'll remember that we had a process that was lined out by which we would pull community members and staff members and put together a naming task force, and they would bring some of the finalists, a group of finalist names to the board for consideration. And that's where we are this evening. So first of all, I'd like to thank that naming task force and thank Casey for leading that effort. I know he had a engaged group of folks that went through the process of doing some community outreach and garnering suggestions from the community. We received 4 finalists that we're bringing to the board this evening. The next steps will include on September 22nd, to stay on our timeline, we would ask that the board put one name, one finalist, one lone finalist on for 30-day review. And then the following meeting, we would be looking at adopting the name for that new elementary school. So that's where we are this evening. The names that are being brought forward to you are Otfolity Ridge, Ridgeview, Sunset Ridge, and Sunset View. Those are the 4 names that have been brought forward from the naming committee for the board for consideration. And Casey, do you want to just spend a couple minutes talking about the background of some of those names and some of the discussion that took place?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And just for the board's reference too, in the board packet, there's quite a bit of data that we gathered from the community with the survey and everything else. But just wanted to give a little bit of highlights on where some of these names came from. Of course, Otfolity Ridge honors the Otfolity people as they refer to themselves as being the northernmost band of the Kalapua Native Americans that lived along the Tualatin River in present-day Washington County. The North Plains Helvetia area was significant hunting, gathering, and trading area for them. I also just wanted to point out with this specific name that we had worked with the Grand Ronde tribe, and we have received information that name would be agreeable, and there's no concerns from the tribe perspective on that. I know that was a concern of the board and some of the community to make sure we went down that process, but they are very supportive of that, and would also, should that name end up being the finalist, they may be open to coming for an opening ceremony that includes members of the Grand Ronde tribe to participate in. Ridgeview is that name that represents the view of the ridge to the north as you exit the elementary school. Sunset Ridge is tied into the development, the Sunset Ridge housing development that the school sits in. And then Sunset View represents a view to the west, as North Plains called itself, the city to the sunset. So those are the 4 names that the task force forwarded to Mike, and then will be forwarded on to you tonight. One of the questions that we want to just make sure is you have all the information you need and all the data you need for these 4 finalists.
Thank you, Casey and Mike. So if there's any follow-up questions from our board members, and again, as Mark commented, just a great job on the content and information in the packet for us to process the information and make our recommendations or reviews. But what do
Really
you
have
need?
to thank Jane Seguenza for all this background information. She was really instrumental in helping us prepare all this stuff.
Of course, Jane. She's amazing.
Yeah, so Jackie, I can answer that. So there's no needed board action tonight for these names. One of the things that I would just want to make sure, and Mike wants to make sure, are there any additional pieces of information that the board may need to consider? Because at the September 22nd meeting is when we'll be looking for a motion. And again, to get down to that lone finalist for 30-day review. So we have followed the outlined process for the naming task force to ES 28. Doesn't necessarily mean that the board may want some additional information that we could research or have. We're now is the time to kind of put that into motion if there is anything needed by the 22nd for that public meeting.
Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, so I understand you're looking for us to request more information, but if we don't do a discussion regarding the 4 choices tonight in public, would we be doing that on the night we have to decide?
Yes, that's correct. The public portion of it will be on the 22nd.
Right, but
for the discussion.
We shouldn't be like having conversations regarding this in secret behind closed doors. We should be doing this out in the open. And if we don't do it now, then you're saying that the only chance that we have to work on the naming in a public session is the day we're supposed to decide. Is that accurate?
No, that's to put it on 30-day review. So with the main discussion will happen on the 22nd to discuss these names. At the end of that discussion, the plan is to have the board make a motion to put that on 30-day review for further review of the naming process.
Put one name forward for 30
One
days
name
review.
forward. Yep.
Right, so we have to decide the one we would collectively like. If we're not discussing today, which seems like maybe we should, I would be an advocate for let's discuss today. If we don't, then we are discussing and deciding on the same day, and we should, based on Oregon public meeting law, not have conversations with each other regarding this topic until that day.
Correct.
So
this meeting tonight does not allow for public testimony after the discussion, which the 22nd will have.
So my question is, usually when we put something on a review for 30 days, sorry, we start with the motion and then we discuss it.
Yeah,
So
that would be the case.
Okay, so
That's how we would do it.
Okay, but how can we do a motion to say I want Sunset Ridge or something and then discuss it if we haven't had any conversations? I'm with Mark. I think maybe discussing it a little bit tonight would be helpful, but maybe
Right,
I'm
I
out of
don't
turn.
understand quite how. So do we put a motion forward for each one of them and discuss all 4?
So one of our goals for this evening was, first of all, to deliver the 4 names to you this evening. And the other thing was to talk through a process by which you could come to one name on the 22nd. If people are feeling that they want to have a discussion now, that's perfectly fine. Our goal tonight was to share the names with you and then put together a process or talk about a process that Rose and Casey and I can then discuss so that we have it available for you on the 22nd.
Yeah, so if there's some, roundtable, Martin said I'm up for roundtable. So if there's any comments or suggestions, if you want to do that now, we can utilize the space. We are actually within time in our agenda. So feel free to do that.
I find it interesting that, and I think it was smart to include it, the strongly dislike factor. That's something I, as I was considering all the time spent as we were thinking about building a building and doing all the kind of stuff and thinking about the naming process, it hadn't really even entered my thought process. So, which ones do people really not like? So I just want to say I appreciate you including that and drawing attention to it as part of the thing. So one of the balances we're trying to strike is not just what's the best name, but also sort of what name would people hate the least, I guess. It's a weird way to put it, but it's, I find it, the page 62 in our packet, I find that slide very informative.
I do have concerns about naming any school after a person or a group of people. And I know you went to Grand Ron Tribe, and I think that's amazing. But I also know that there are schools that tribes years and years and years ago that the tribes supported the mascot and the use of Indians. I went to Roseburg High School, so I can tell you they went to the local tribe. The local tribe thought that was great. They were proud of it. They wanted to keep it. And then times changed and things changed. So I just want to make sure that what we're doing is not only culturally sensitive, but also will stay relevant for the life of the school. So that's one of my concerns about naming a school after a person or a group.
I would disagree with that. I think that if we're going to be representative of all groups of people, and I think naming schools is a way that we honor people and groups. And so I think in order to inspire, especially like our students of color and stuff, they need to see like their role models and their groups also represented in our naming of buildings and stuff like that. So I would disagree. I think that if we limit ourselves to that, we could be I guess missing an opportunity to be more inclusive.
Comment with Martin. You are unmuted, Martin.
Okay. Boy, that was a struggle mode. Sorry about that. I was telling Jordan early on, me and technology. So I was reading the Atfa Lati pronunciation, and I couldn't get back to my tab to click on the board meeting. Sorry about that. I really like the idea of, well, first of all, we have a district full of white men's names plastered all over our buildings. And appropriately so. I don't disparage any of that. But I think that my personal sensibilities is that to not be racist is to be, kind of in the vein that you name it after things that are like, Galaxy, or I don't want to use any of our current names because I don't want to sound like I don't support them. I love all of our current names, but to not be racist is to sort of avoid the risks of a name. But to be anti-racist, I think, is to be a bit bolder. And that's kind of where I see this as an opportunity to be anti-racist and to specifically name our First Peoples, I think is very much in that vein for me. I completely agree with Jackie. We absolutely positively have to guarantee this is consistent with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ron. And I actually have an idea how we could do that. We could invite them out to a naming ceremony, and that way their support for this name is manifest. It's obvious to the community that the Grand Ron, we don't have a letter on file somewhere. It's like they're part of the the opening ceremony for this new school. So I think there's ways we could engage with the Grand Ronde. That's a lot more than just seeking their approval, but actually their involvement as we maybe even design the building and incorporate some Native American art. And then as we open the building, and maybe even there's some unique curriculum things that we do because of our engagement of the First Peoples in that region. So I'm totally in love with the Atfalati Ridge idea, and then the engagement with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde that invites on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, Martin. I think that's a really great point. I think historically sometimes just the checking of the box, like, oh yeah, we checked in with a certain group of people, and not really having that intentionality of building it as part of just the fabric of our institution, and as normalizing that that's just how we do business, is to make sure that we are intentionally involving the communities and honoring the First Peoples. And so I totally agree with your point of view there. And I think it's back to one of the board goals that we're talking about, doing that, having that social justice lens, and how do we measure that? Speaking about how do we measure if we've done things, or if we're doing things that are actionable. Here's like a really good example of things that we can look back and evaluate for ourselves as well. Mark, you had
Erica, just real quick, Erica and Martin, just on that with engaging the tribe, should this name go forward, we are in talks with them to be part of the mascot process, naming process, to make sure that fits within the values of the tribe. And then also the ceremony that Martin, we have talked to them about that, and they would like to participate in that should we get to that point.
Thanks, Casey. Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, a couple of questions, of course. So the data on page 26, the strongly like, dislike, the methodology behind that, maybe it would be a Jane question, not yours. Were people only allowed to choose one in that category, or could they have said, I strongly like Sunset Ridge, and Sunset View, or would they have had to differentiate between?
They fill out that survey for every name we get, all 9. So they were able to select on each specific name. So a person gave 9 opinions on how they felt for each name.
Okay, and they were each independent. So it wasn't,
yes.
It's not like you could take, so I mean, Sunset Ridge and Sunset View are similar, right? So
correct.
But you can't really take the blue category and combine them together to say, right. So the methodology wouldn't say that those are, nobody exclusively voted for either one of those.
Correct.
Okay. And sort of I can't find the actual line in the document now, but I remember it from earlier. And maybe you could add some context to this from being in the room with these discussions. I think the dislike and the not very much like on just Sunset by itself was related to the fact that there's a Sunset High School in another district very nearby, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, we got a variety of comments on that confusion.
Right. So that I'm not hallucinating. I did remember hearing that. So
you did.
So can you add a little context from in the room of how somebody could be so opposed to the idea of just Sunset, but incorporating that word with another word? So maybe a little context as to how somebody would go, yeah, I don't love Sunset because there's already Sunset High School, but Sunset Ridge, that sounds great.
Yeah. So I think it is part of that. So in the discussions we had, Sunset alone, I think people are drawn to the proximity of Sunset High School in Beaverton. Then the next name, like, Sunset Ridge, with the ties directly, there's already a name associated with the city of North Plains and Sunset Ridge to the neighborhood. And then the standalone third name is just a direct tie to the city of North Plains with the view, Sunset View of the town, the motto. So that's why they were differentiated, I think, from the community to begin with.
Well, enough people in the room felt like adding that extra word sort of differentiated enough from the existing high school?
Correct.
Okay, so just, I guess, comment then, I would probably, the Sunset Ridge one, it's got quite a bit of strongly dislike and dislike. And to the comment farther down of, avoid name of a person or early colonizer settlers. It's not entirely accurate to say, but it's almost like that's what Sunset Ridge is. Not early, but like today, colonizing that little area of North Plains. So, the idea of naming it after the development makes me a little bit nervous. Just
I will tell you that we put, we put the name Sunset Ridge on there mainly because of, there was support in the community. It was not as well supported by the task force, really due to the fact that we didn't want, the feeling was they didn't want to name it after a neighborhood. And then on the other side of that is they felt like this was an opportunity to really do something unique and special with honoring the native tribe.
Yeah, I mean, Ridgeview and Atfalati Ridge both have ridge in them, and they both have the least amount of strongly dislike. Okay, thanks. That was my question.
I would also just like to say a little bit about that sunset thing. I just feel like it's kind of been done too many times. There's a lot of Sunset Highway and Sunset High School, and I want to be a little bit more original, I would say, is I'm advocating for something different and not as kind of done before. Is there any additional comments, discussions, or questions for Casey to follow up on that you may have? I know that there was actually a question here from Martin about when do we pivot to a discussion on policy for ES 29? So I'm just voicing that so that Mike can take note of that.
As we've had to, and let's talk about that in just a second here. But as we talk about the 4 names, as we just look at process for the 22nd, are you wanting to consider all 4 names at that time? Are you wanting to narrow it down some this evening? Or what would help you prepare for the 22nd? Is it something as simple as we wait till the 22nd and we vote and we get and find out what the top 2 are, and then we have a discussion about those top 2? Is it just throw it out there and all 4 and take a straw vote? I'm just wanting to help you be successful on the 22nd.
Jackie mentioned on the comments she would like to have our board members that are not here be present basically before we finalized names. And then Mark had a question. Mark, I think he might have frozen.
One idea. I think we've done this with other things. Is in the work session on the 22nd, you could have the discussion a little deeper about narrowing it for the public session. If that's something that we wanted to wait for the discussion for Lisa and Sheehan to be a part of.
Yeah. Mark, you kind of froze, but I think you had a question.
Yeah, I did. I did freeze. I lost my connection briefly. Would it be possible to have not just the naming ceremony thing, but have somebody from the Tribes of the Grandmont at the board meeting to do a public comment on the 22nd? So we're going to do public comment. Would it be possible to have someone say, yeah, we're okay with this?
So not for the 22nd. What they have provided us is with an email of support they indicated that if they wanted something, if the district needed something formalized through the tribe for them to hold one of their meetings to formally do something, it would be a month or two out.
So that the email of support is from an authoritative voice?
Yes, he speaks for the tribe, but if we wanted something formal from the entire tribe itself, they would have to have some meetings to go through that. But he did indicate that he speaks for the tribe.
And would that process start if there was a motion, let's say that's the name that we wanted, we still have our 30-day review period that we have to wait on. Would that process already of engaging them for a more formal begin?
We could ask them. I mean, we could ask them now that say that the board is requesting something, a formal process from the tribe, and we could find out a timeline for them. He just indicated it would be 30 to 60 days to do that.
I would love to get more information on that, and at the very least, at the 22nd, I wouldn't mind hearing you read that email into the record.
Okay. Yeah, you see, we have a few emails from the representative there.
In regards to the process, Mike, I think that utilizing, like Casey said, utilizing part of our work session on the 22nd to work through what our kind of top two might be when we have our full board present. So they're able to participate in that naming process. And then I think we'll be able to get a sense during our work session what's kind of the name. And of course, anybody can make a motion, even if they want to make a motion for a different name. But I think that that's where we kind of come to a consensus as a board of where we want to move forward. Does that seem like a good process for our board members? Seeing him not. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you.
So Martin had asked the question about board policy, and just as a reminder, I'm forgetting, I should have it in front of me. I'm forgetting the dates when when this policy was updated. It does reflect a lot of conversation that's gone on over the last 10 years or so. And if the board is interested in taking a look at this, the policy that spells out the manner in which facilities are named, we'd be happy to do that. We currently don't have it on an agenda, but if that's something that people would like to do, we are going to be naming another school, at least one more school in the near future following this one.
I think it was spring of 19, if I remember right. But yeah, we can always look at policy.
That's correct. See, March of 19.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, especially with the conversations on this topic nationally in every space. We talk about this, and it would be great for us to revisit that. I also was thinking about something that Fran and Saida talked about, just utilizing that lens of who are we creating barriers for, who are we missing, and we should be doing that with all of our policies, but that would be a good practice for us as a board to utilize our equity lens.
All right.
And there's a comment on here from Mark. Okay, everybody seems like they're good with it to review.
All right, we'll get it scheduled. Thank you.
All right, our next item is our fall 2020 update.
Hey, just one more thing. Casey did look into the correct pronunciation of this, and just so that we're all on the same page as we move into the 22nd and knowing how important it is to pronounce these correctly. Casey, would you like to demonstrate and say and tell them what you learned?
Okay. And I will also, I'm going to share, I'll probably share it in the update. We have from the tribe an oral pronunciation of this specifically from them, a recorded version. So if you break down the name, it's Ah Fa Lottie. Athalati. Athalati. Hope you can hear that. Athalati.
I saw that in our board packet. Jane, of course, put a hyperlink.
All right, thank you. And we'll practice at the beginning of our meeting on the 22nd, just to make sure that we're being incredibly respectful as we move forward in this process. All right, Travis, fall 2020.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick updates to keep you posted on some developments. The first one is about access to Wi-Fi hubs for students who live in far out rural areas. Jordan, do you have a slide deck to support this conversation for the fall 2020 updates? And this one came from North Plains, Groner, and Farmington. They have families that live within the halo of cell towers, but the cell signal doesn't get to where they are based on ridges and trees and things like that. So our Wi-Fi hotspot deployment hasn't reached them. The Wi-Fi hotspot doesn't do anything because it can't receive the cell signal. So go ahead and advance, please. Keep going. So we've gotten together with the principals and a support team, thanks to everybody who's been involved in this, to figure out how to address this need for what we think might be about 40 families. Keep going. And so we're proposing to use Groner, Farmington, and North Plains as rural Wi-Fi hubs, staff these places with either classified staff from the school, repurposed classified staff, and LPNs to make sure we can do health checks. We'd be open 5 days a week. We'd have intact cohorts of 10 or fewer people, perhaps including parents supporting smaller students. And 2 hours a pop would meet the guidelines for limited in-person services. And this would be based on invitation only. These would not be open for the community. These would be families that we've identified during this outreach week who could come in and use these spots at a scheduled time that works for them. So the principals right now are gathering that data. Go ahead.
Travis, LPNs for abbreviation.
Yeah, licensed practical nurse. Is that right, Yadira? People in the medical field?
That's right.
Thank you. Blueprints. So we're going ahead and putting floor plans and identifying the restrooms that could be used and safety protocols for these schools, even though this is going to be very limited service. And we're doing outreach to families and working on staffing this week. On Friday, we'll get together with the principals to look at the data and decide how many families this is and who would be accessing these services. Happy to answer any questions on that one before we go to childcare update.
I had a question just because this kind of reminded me of another thing that I had received an email before from Home Plate, and how they also have kind of that struggle with accessing a spot for students that are experiencing homelessness. So even if it's not like the Wi-Fi reception, but it's just a place to actually be at, to be able to connect or have a plug, and things like that we're not thinking about right now. I know that right now it's summertime, and so if people are experiencing homelessness, they are places that they can go in. But as we moved into colder months and we think about shelters or things like that, if I don't know, through the McKinney-Vento program or anything else, we're looking at creating the same kind of like a hub or something.
Yeah, great question. To my knowledge, we haven't created a hub, but I was at the central office the other day and I actually overheard a conversation with the parent and one of our liaisons for our McKinney-Vento program asking questions about connectivity, and we're trying to serve students individually and families who are in that situation.
Thank you, Travis.
Yeah, I can't tell you how important this week of engagement has been, so thank you for adapting the calendar so that we can make these calls. I've been a part of them and it's powerful. So thanks for that question, Erica. Okay, I don't see any more in the chat, so I'll go ahead with the childcare update. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. So the Washington County Board of Commissioners approved $5.5 million of CARES Act contingency. If you go to the audio link, don't do it now, please. But if anybody's curious about exactly what the intentions of the commission have been in the conversation and wants to follow that, if you go to the audio at 2 hours and 16 minutes and 50 seconds, you can hear it for yourself. Thank you to the commissioners for hearing us regionally describe the challenges that we're facing with school-age kids age 5 to 12 who are not in school 5 days a week. And we've never experienced this during a school year when teachers and classified staff are trying to run school, not to mention other essential workers. And you've seen the resolution from last time. Thank you for passing that. And we continue this conversation with a new phase now, with money going from the county to school districts in the county to support a couple of different things. One is to expand the capacity of slots. They're hoping that countywide we can increase school-age slots, 1,200 or 1,800 additional slots. We are also going to be allowed to subsidize childcare costs for families, prioritizing essential workers and folks who've been economically impacted by COVID, and then the community at large, and supporting equitable access and subsidy. So using a lens of equity to make sure that families who need this support the most get subsidized for the care expense that they're being hit with now. Keep going, please. So right now there's a team that's assembled from public health and early learning, working on what the parameters of this allocation would be. It's going to be an intergovernmental agreement between the county and school districts to administer the dollars. And we're getting allocated according to our population of students in our district, we think. So there'd be proportionality between Forest Grove, Beaverton, Tiger Tualatin, HSD. Still unknown, and we hope to find out tomorrow what the parameters are on this money. Keep going. So as we've talked with the early learning folks and regional leaders, we're trying to identify how this would take shape. Right now we have a position posted for a supervisor position to help with partnership expansion toward more care and subsidized care in Washington County. We want to expand our existing partnerships. We want to support the licensure of new facilities like we've done with the city. And then ERDC is the employment-related daycare benefit that many families are able to access up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And there's a conversation out of the commission that suggested that we use these dollars to raise the subsidy up to 300% of the poverty level, scooping up many more families who would then qualify for subsidy of their care. Not necessarily free daycare, but a benefit to help them make ends meet during this time. And then we also have the responsibility of, when we devise what the plan is for getting this money out to the community, how we would communicate that so that families would find out that they're eligible. Not only our own families with the district and the city and the county, but families impacted economically by COVID, and then the community at large. So we'll have a leader hopefully next week who can help folks like Kelly Purdy and Brooke Nova and Christy Wilson from the city and myself form a team around how to deploy these dollars to increase slots and subsidized care. This is all I know, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but really we won't know many more answers about the structure of this until later this week.
Thank you, Travis, for that information piece. I know that that's something that we talked about in our last board meeting, how we passed a resolution knowing though that it's something that a lot of families still couldn't afford, and I'm hoping that this is helpful in that endeavor. Our next item that we have is our SRO update with Mike.
All right, thank you. As you know, we've been engaged in this conversation for several months now, and I wanted to provide you just an update on where we currently are. I also want to note that the process that I'm going to lay out for you here, I just want to be very transparent that the whole notion behind this process that I'm laying out is that we would continue to have school resource officers in the building, but we would use all of the feedback that we've received to address the concerns and have that spelled out, address those concerns in our next memorandum of understanding with the city and the county, and make sure that we have processes in place that are addressing those concerns. With that being said, I also fully understand that that may not be the will of the board. So while what I'm going to spell out is a process by which we would edit and revise the MOU. I also understand that we may get to the end of this and the board makes a different decision. So I just wanted to put that out there so that we are all on the same page as I go through what this process is. In a number of conversations to better understand the concerns around school resource officers. That's included some parent groups, some staff groups. We've met with our administrative team, and while they are wanting to keep the school resource officers in the buildings, they also would be the first to tell you that we need to make some adjustments and there needs to be some reinvention that takes place. And what they would cite as the reasons for wanting to keep those folks in the building is just the familiarity that they have with the students and the families, and that when it comes time for need for law enforcement, the person that you get from patrol would not have those same relationships or background that they have with our students. So that's a big component for them. We also, in addition to those conversations, you'll remember that we put out surveys. We received over 2,000 responses on those surveys, and we shared that data with you as well as the administrative team and with law enforcement who provides the school resource officers. Following that, I put together a group and many of which you met when they came and talked to the board a couple months back, but put together a team of administrators that was tasked with putting together an MOU that took into account the concerns that we've heard both in our feedback as well as in the data that was the surveys that were returned to us. So their goal is to put together an MOU, to draft an MOU that we would then take forward and share with selected groups, whether that be family groups or staff groups, as well as a group of students that I'm going to meet with next week. And the group of students that I'm going to meet with next week, they not only include our student reps that you see here on the screen, but also representatives from each of our high schools that have been recommended from the administrative team that would include kids that would have some feelings and some insight on this. Following some of that writing and vetting that takes place, we would then bring the MOU back here for consideration. So at that point, we would be at a spot where the board would be looking to, or we'd be asking the board to help us make a decision on, are we going to include with school resource officers in the buildings or not? So really that's where we are at this point. The process that I just laid out, the end goal of that is to come back with an MOU that the board would consider. And that's really where we're at. Any questions I can answer for anybody?
Martin and Jackie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mike. I understand inherently that the process you've undertaken, Mike, is to be sort of it's taking a fresh look, but ultimately to have something that is essentially what the city of Hillsboro is going to offer us. It's within that framework of more or less what they current offer. And I'm wondering if there isn't an opportunity for us as a board politically, not necessarily staff to staff, but board to council, and ask them, what are they thinking about re-envisioning policing in the community? And how would that impact what an HSD participation, an HPD participation in HSD might look differently from their perspective, recognizing, the need for, like Cahoots comes to mind, the program down at Eugene that's gotten a lot of visibility, where I don't even think they're armed, and they're really more about diffusing crises and a non-traditional response. So I'm wondering, if in your process, is there a time for us as a board to talk with the city council about what they're thinking, and really more about what we might need from them if we were to sort of free ourselves from an armed, uniformed law enforcement officer?
Thanks, Martin. Jackie, and then we'll have Devlin.
My concern is that from this, that we only got about 2,000 survey responses, which to me, in a district our size, seems really, really low. I'm not saying we didn't advertise it in the right places or what we should or shouldn't have done. I just think that's really low, and I'm wondering if there's something we can do or to increase community input. Because I think this is extremely important to hear what our community and our the kids in school and our staff members want and what they see. And so I don't know what that looks like, but I would encourage us maybe to look at some alternatives to increase feedback from more people.
Jackie, one of our goals when we went out to do the surveying, and I'll let Dale talk about this, but one of our goals when we went out to do the surveying was to make sure that we were getting feedback that was representative of our student body. And so a lot of that was targeted. And Dale, do you want to talk through that for a second, just to clarify?
Sure. I think the overall challenge was just that we were in summer. And so the amount of families checking emails and students checking emails was pretty low. Like normally if we send out a blast through just hot news or emails and ask families to participate, it's disproportionately our white families that participate. And so we really tried to reach out, every principal reached out to families of color to balance that. We look at the number of survey respondents. I think I'm in agreement with you. It is our students that we didn't get as many students participating. They were trying to do summer. So I think I think definitely those voices, and I think that's why Mike asked for that representative group of students next week. But part of our original thought was if we were to proceed and come up with an MOU, that we would in the spring, late spring, April, May, go back out into our community. I think one of the things that was very clear in all groups, and perhaps you remember it, but whether you're looking at staff or parents or community members or students, there was like, what exactly are they supposed to do? And so I think clarifying for all stakeholders, what are they doing, and being really clear, because it's hard to assess whether or not they're meeting a goal if we haven't really been clear about what that goal is.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Devlin, and then Mark.
All right. So Dale already kind of touched on this, but just something I wanted to point out is that students weren't very heavily represented in the survey that was sent out. I think that I have this pulled up right now, but we had around 2,000 responses to the survey in total. And of that, maybe a little under 200 were students. I feel like that we could possibly do a better job of maybe getting the students involved and asking them what their opinion is, especially since we have advisory classes now. We have an opportunity to send out some sort of survey, just pick any advisory class, have them fill out a survey. We have an opportunity to get more student involvement, I feel like, and that's something that we should consider as a board. Or, well, you guys should, you know what I mean.
Thank you, Devlin. Mark?
This may be just reinforcing Martin's point a little bit, but I had sort of expected that one of the next steps, if not the next step for us in this process, was going to be to have a discussion with our law enforcement partners. And it's just sort of surprising me that that's not our very next step or the one right after that. I think almost every law enforcement agency in the country is being tasked with For us to sort of move forward arbitrarily in our own direction without engaging them seems a little bit out of step with the reality. I can't imagine the Hillsboro Police Department won't be trying to make some changes as to how they do policing. I think it's a pretty valid conversation for us to have, to say, how does that change you envision impact us and your engagement with the district?
And if I didn't mention that, we've already had 2 meetings with law enforcement, and we would also ask them to
Right,
have.
but we haven't heard from them. I thought that was going to be a thing, right?
Right. The original plan was to give them an MOU to react to for the conversation. So if
I didn't know that was the original plan.
Yeah,
Sorry.
if we want to do something different, we can do that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I still feel like the police department is just one department within the whole organization. And to Martin's point, having a conversation at that elected level of looking at their council and talking with our board with especially as we talk about a lot about our work in this anti-racist space and what we envision our district being, and kind of modeling and trying to achieve is for us to also have a conversation with our partners at that organizational level, like our commissioners or our council members, to say, here's what our needs are in our district. We understand this is one resource avenue that as a partners you have given to us is in this space in law enforcement, but re-envisioning that to think about what are the other ways that maybe we haven't thought about how we can be better partners to each other in meeting the needs of our students, whether it's things that we have a lot of, data and research that shows how after school activities improves academics, or sports, and maybe asking for, more expansion of the BLAST program to some of our schools, or scholarship to a lot of those programs that the Parks and Recs department does or has. So just reimagining is thinking outside of just law enforcement, but thinking that's, if you think about it in dollars, that's dollars that they're putting into our districts and meeting a need in our district. But how else are we not, maybe it's also on us that we're not communicating what we're actually needing in our district, and making sure that at that leadership level, they take that information and we say, here are our needs. Is this still the way that you want to address those needs, or can we think about a different way? Or is it a mixture? But it's really having that conversation, I think, in that space from one, agency to another. And I think that's our responsibility as our board to do that. Mark, you have a comment?
Yeah, and I guess if Mike feels that the next best step towards that is to define what we would like to see from our partnership in an MOU. If that's what Mike feels like is the next best step based on his conversations he had, I can support that. I hadn't thought that was the direction we were working towards, so I was taken a little off guard. But if Mike, if you feel like the next best thing that we can do is sort of clarify what we expect from them, and that's the catalyst for the conversation that we have as a governing body with the city council and the chief of police and whomever, I can support that.
Well, I think we could do both, Mark. We could continue down. We can continue with this process to identify concerns and see if we can get those represented in an MOU, a way to address those concerns. I think we can continue down that road in case we end up needing that, while at the same time requesting a meeting with the city of Hillsboro to get the board and the counselors together. I think we can continue with both of those.
And just a question, because I know we shared our data that we have with law enforcement, but also our partner agencies, like at that governing level, like we elected or commissioners, have we shared our data also with them?
We have not.
I think that would be great to be able to do that and preemptive, so that when we meet with them, we're also bringing that voice and those concerns, but also sharing our needs in the district and what we have. Like, I mean, even today, talking about how we're not adopting curriculum because we don't have money, and figuring out ways of how we do that. And I just think that there's other opportunities that we might be able to capitalize if we're able to work in a true partnership with them, understanding our needs, not just taking, you know, whatever it is that they've given to us in the past, but really not understanding what it is that we're dealing with in regards to funding and the programs that we need for our kiddos. There's a comment from Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What occurs to me is that this is a vexing issue. There doesn't seem to, nothing's really gelled in my mind except more questions. But maybe we should just recognize that and enter into a discussion about, hey, we want to try new things and just try them. Maybe the city of Hillsboro wants to try a Cahoots program or something completely different. And we say, hey, let's put some framework around that, but we might consider trying it in the context of SROs. I don't know that anybody really knows an answer to what 21st century law enforcement looks like in America or in Hillsboro or Washington County with complete certainty. And maybe that's what we need to do, is just allow ourselves that we're going to try some things and see if something isn't a better fit than what we got right now.
Jackie?
Sorry, I didn't know what's next. So that brings a question, Martin, to my mind of still, and I think maybe this is something that we're already working on. I mean, I'm sure it is. What do our school resource officers do? And in relation to that, the administrators who want to keep the SROs in the buildings, why? I mean, I know you gave a couple reasons why, but what exactly are our school resource officers doing in school and for the administrators that increase or make them so valuable to our administrators, if that makes sense? I mean, yeah, I would just like to understand more what it is that they're doing. I mean, you know, the things I'm hearing are not tangible. It's like building relationships or with the students. And I'd like to know more tangible. What can I, does that make sense?
Yeah, like a couple meetings ago, we shared some data on how they spend their time.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe be helpful to review that as well. We can talk about that in maybe a more specific way.
Yeah, I think I've asked before too, but there's a national association that Alex had mentioned, and I think just asking them for any like research that they've done into, does it, the schools that have them, does it, lower discipline? Does it lower crime in community? Like, what is the tangible, like, data that we can get around this to support, like, yes, we're keeping it and we're reimagining what we're doing with it, or no, this is something that we need to go back and, especially as we talk as elected officials to other elected officials. Well, here's what we found out. Let's compare notes. What is your organization is doing? We're looking at it from that student centered perspective of what it does, and like building relationships. And I think Casey pointed out, we have 9, but we have like over 20,000 students. So really, how are we measuring that? And I think the other component to this is thinking about how can we engage in that conversation a little bit more, like you were saying, Jackie, more prepared with like tangible information, especially as we move on to discuss this further. Mark, you had a comment.
I'm struggling with a way to find a way to phrase it so it doesn't seem adversarial, but I still think I would love to hear someone who is advocating for the continuation of SROs explain what makes a school unique and that having a person with a gun around is a good idea. So I think it was brought up last time we discussed this. When you're in Fred Meyer or at the gas station or in church, most people don't tend to go, what would make this better? A person with a gun. So an answer to that. It was just in my mind, that question was a very clarifying moment for me of what makes a school unique. And I'm sure somebody has a good answer to this. I just haven't heard it yet. That what we think is, oh, this would be better if there were just somebody with a gun around.
Can I respond just a little bit to a couple things? So I first want to respond to Erica just about the research, because we have been doing lots of research trying to find research out there that correlates or has some sort of causative whatever around having SROs and the impact of students academically or what have you. Mostly what we find out there is research on programs like GREAT or DARE or something like that, right? And what you'll probably not be surprised to find is it's sort of person dependent, right? And we even heard that through our surveys. Like when we have a great relationship that has an impact. We heard anecdotal stories as we talked to kids and families, everything from kids seeking out the SRO to talk to them for advice and support and mentorship and connection to things, all the way to kids saying that it wasn't positive. They felt watched or profiled, or they didn't feel comfortable. So I think for me, that's why it kind of comes back to being really, really clear about what is it that they're doing and what is it that we don't want them to do. I think in terms of Mark's question, I hope our police force, whether it's in our community or in our schools, are seen as people that are a whole lot more useful than just a person with a gun. They're a person with a lot of skills and a lot of training in de-escalation, connecting with resources, understanding the law, understanding what is and isn't appropriate or legal. For the school setting, I mean, there are situations where you do need legal advice or law enforcement, whether it's because you have parents and there's a custody issue. As you saw in the data, you'll probably recall a lot of what our SROs assist with is DHS calls and supporting students who are in situations where they're not safe or there's been a report of child abuse. Our high schools lean on them for advice regarding drug paraphernalia that they find or some sort of situation that kids bring to them. Is this disciplinary? Is this legal? That doesn't necessarily mean that they're involved, but they certainly are people who provide support and insight and information to our schools. I can tell you from personal experience, the difference between, and you heard this from administrators throughout our district, but the difference between calling a street cop who doesn't really understand children, the developmental process of kids, how to work with families around some of those issues compared to somebody who's had that training is sort of night and day. It definitely is a skill that, an SRO will come in and say, buddy, what happened? What's going on? Where a street cop's going to come in and just, run through the law and you're like, this is an 8-year-old, like, what are you doing? So I think that there's a lot of positives that they bring into our system, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying that, I'm for them or against them or whatever, but I do think that in our feedback that we heard from all levels, our administrators, staff, students, and parents, that there are some things that are working. And so how do we, especially in this transition time and COVID time, make sure that we're not pulling away support from our kids and families that they've relied on, if indeed it is support that we need? And how do we revamp it? How do we make it better? I love Martin's comment about, a different way to approach kids and families. And I think we've heard that, we've been working on trauma-informed care. And I think we've heard that in multiple situations, that we need new approaches to supporting and helping our kids and families throughout our community. So I just wanted to share that perspective.
So to paraphrase, are you saying essentially that somebody with their skill set is very beneficial to a school and they just happen to have a gun? That's not the focus of it, but that's like, we need this kind of person, and the fact that they have a gun is not part of the equation?
I would say the skill set is very important. Whether or not they have a gun, I don't know if that's something we can negotiate as part of an MOU.
Yeah, I can't imagine right. We discussed that before. A cop's not going to want to be assigned. But just the sort of litany you just went through seems very valuable. None of those things really require a gun.
Correct.
it seems like what you're saying in response to the sort of question I asked is what we'd like is to have somebody with these sort of capabilities, and that the side effect is that comes with a person with a gun.
Yeah,
if I'm not paraphrasing you correctly, please correct me.
No. I understand what you're saying. I honestly, from my personal experience, I don't know if and or when they've ever been required to use a gun and how that manifests itself on a campus. I'm not aware of that. I don't know what the parameters are around that. But I can tell you that the skill set they bring beyond that has been helpful to our schools in many situations.
Thanks. I'll get out of the way. There's a lot more comments.
And I think that's actually, it speaks to what we're asking is to name those specific things that we're looking for and how we as a board engage with our counterparts in telling the story about what resources we're looking for or what are the things that we're trying to pinpoint. Is like, here's what we're getting or here's what we're utilizing them for. Because maybe even to them as well, to Mark's point, is like, oh, this is what you're utilizing. We actually have this other resource that would be a better fit, or that would be, something that meets that need, but in a different way. And so I think for us as a board, we're trying to get to that, like, what is it? And what are those kind of list of things that we're getting in exchange so that we can have those conversations at that higher level with our counterparts. There's a question on here from Maya. I want to make sure
Hi. I was just wondering how far the position of an SRO can be reimagined. For example, I hear a lot making those connections starting at a young age with SROs is a big concern of losing if they were to not be in schools. So I was wondering if it was possible to think out of the box, could they teach a lesson in class and not necessarily be policing in schools, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the different iterations we've had of school resource officers over the years, we have had school resource officers teach lessons many times. It used to be a majority of what they did in a school was teach lessons, especially at the elementary level. So I think our law enforcement partners have demonstrated over and over that they're willing to evolve their practices or change their practices to meet our needs. And I even think back to, it wasn't that long ago that schools started to become targets for violence. And it was at that point that the city of Hillsboro and Washington County sheriff, they actually revised the manner in which they would enter a building if there were a live shooter incident. And they actually revised what they were doing to better meet our students' needs. And we don't have to think back very far where we have people at board meetings saying we need armed officers in every building. And so as we talk about this latest conversation, I think our law enforcement partners have demonstrated that they're willing to change their practices if it's what's best for the school. So I don't think this is any different. The conversations that I've had with the chief and the sheriff, they have both said, let's sit down and talk about this. We need to understand what your needs are. And I guess that's why I've been going down the MOU route to give everyone something to react to see if we can get there. Again, I understand we may not go that direction, but I at least wanted to try and capture all of the feedback that we've received in an MOU so we can have that conversation. But Maya, to your simplest question is yes, I think we can re-envision. I think it's wide open at this point. I don't know about carrying the weapon issue because they are part of a larger network. And I don't know if that would be on the table or not, but in terms of how they spend their time, I think it's wide open.
Thank you. Comment by Jackie?
Just to support what Erica and Dale and Mark were saying, sometimes when I try to find a solution to something, I start backwards. So start with what is it that we need for our students and to support our students and our administrators, and then kind of work it work into how can, like Erica said, our story, and maybe there are other services that can provide those needs that we have that don't carry again. Right. So that was it.
Yeah, I'm just more advocating for thinking outside of the box and not thinking that this is for all those needs that we're having right now, that this is the only solution, but really in the true sense of partnership, meeting with our partners and communicating, these are our actual needs right now. And let's talk about what could possibly be a solution and how we can maybe think about meeting those things. And that's really where I'm trying to guide us in that conversation and not really kind of pigeonhole us like we haven't even decided whether or not we keep a program like this, but we're already kind of moving in that direction. And I want to make sure that that's not the signal that we're sending to our community, that we aren't doing our due diligence to have these conversations with our partner agencies. I think to the point, there's a really good point that Dale brought up about, an SRO kind of has a better understanding about our school systems and our kids and things and how things work in our area versus maybe a regular cop that doesn't. But does that mean that we're utilizing our school to teach that to those officers, or should we be thinking larger? How do we make sure that even if the kid is not in our school space, that when they're being treated in the same way as a child or looked at in that same way? So thinking about those things, and that's something that's a really good point to bring to our partner agencies. This is one of the reasons why we have that, but this program is because this is the need that was meeting. But is that the way that we should be looking at how to fulfill that need? Or is this a larger conversation of us presenting that information as they themselves are also looking and reimagining how they do policing, that we're able to provide that information that may benefit them in looking at those things?
Erica, add in one.
Yeah, go ahead, Fran.
We've talked a lot tonight about equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racist systems, what have you. And we had kind of mentioned before that that's an active journey, but part of what we're talking about here with school resource officers is the fact that in order for us to move forward and think out of the box, and kind of what Maya was saying, is we have to have those reflective conversations, and reflective conversations take time. And as much as we want to move things to a resolution, this is a systemic construct that has been created since slavery is first started. So we're talking hundreds of years of when policing first started. So through the years, for us to at this point, when we're talking about SROs, it's a huge thing we're talking about because they are a part of a bigger system that was built to do a different function than what they're doing now. So I would just totally encourage us all that as much as we want to move on and have resolution, that in order for us to build this system that we're all talking about wanting to build for our students, it also involves us having those self-reflective conversations that take a little bit more time than what we're used to doing in order to get it right. I also, after the first meeting that we went to, Mike went back and he, based on your recommendations, had met with HPD. And from that, I just wanted you guys to know that HPD and one of our teacher affinity groups and myself are meeting this week to further our reflective conversation on SROs and where we're moving. And, I'm a doer. I'm like, I know where I want our end goal to be, and can we just get there? Much like JC was saying, like, I want a backwards plan and backward map this out to where daughter of who was raised by a cop and whose mom worked for LAPD for 38 years, who's also an educator and trying to be an anti-racist systemic educator too. So I toggle between both worlds. I'm also a person of color who have been pulled over more times in Washington County than I can count. And so I'm trying to see all avenues of it, but what I would encourage us all to do with the conversation that we're having is to understand that, like, we have to have these reflective conversations in order for us to break down the systemic system that has been created for us over the years.
Thank you, Fran. I'll let Yadira go.
So I guess I'm hearing two things. We we want to, one, address what needs we have and present that to our counterparts like on the city council, and then also discuss an MOU, which Mike's been putting together from our discussions going on. Am I right? So we have kind of two different conversations going on, and I guess how are we going to get together and discuss this topic specifically in order to make to move forward? So I guess I'm a little confused as to, I know we have the MOU, now we want to talk to, city council and see, and it's a huge system, right? In order to start making traction. But I guess, what are our next steps? Because I think we're looking at this at big picture, small, so what is it? What's our next step from here, knowing that we're going to be traveling hundreds of miles?
Yeah. My whole goal in pursuing this MOU option was, if the board decided to keep SROs, that we would have something that addressed the concerns of our community, our staff members, and our board members. So that's why I've been pursuing this MOU route, so that we have it available to us if we end up going that direction. I also fully understand that we may not go that direction. As of tonight, it sounds like our very next step, I think we should keep moving on the MOU in case we need it, and it gives us something to react to. I also think in terms of our very next steps, we should probably set up a meeting with City of Hillsboro City Council, or request a meeting to get together with them, and then have a conversation that's bigger concepts than just what's an SRO do with their time, right? So I think that's probably the very next thing I'll work on. In requesting that meeting, it would be helpful if we could brainstorm some of the agenda items that we would like to see covered, so that when I make that request, I would have some specifics that I can tie to it. So what are some thoughts there? What would you like to cover during that meeting?
I think one is, back to Dale's point, is clearly establishing what are the things that we are receiving right now as part of that. Like, what are our needs that are being met through this? Whether it's classes that they're presenting, or just pinpointing exactly this is what we're getting right now, that are needs in their district. I think there's also, if there's a way to find out information from us, compile information about needs that we have, that we think those potential partners can also meet. And I'm thinking about, like, within Washington County, we can talk about mental health, and how there's needs there that maybe can come out of this conversation about partnerships and in that dialogue. So if there's additional things that we know that our kids are needing in the district and that we don't have, but that those partners may have access or know about, that those are other topics that we might be able to bring up, so that they are aware of what is out there for us to be met, and we can have those conversations at that level. And I'll let anybody else go with other ideas, what they would like to see for that agenda.
Go ahead, Martin.
Thank you, Jackie. I think there's a lack of clarity around their response capability. I think most people in the community would assume they're there for, like, an active shooter, and to me, I don't think they're there at all for that. And if they were to be there, it would be coincidental. They're not. We don't have a post where at all times there's an SRO in the building. They have a variety of duties in a variety of buildings, and so dispelling the myth that they're going to be there for some sort of incident response I think would be helpful, which begs the question, what is the sheriff's and the city's incident response plan? And if they could speak to that, then we could almost confidently put away the need for a weapon, because they're really not going to be there for whatever scenario people might think they're there for that really involves a weapon. Or maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's confusion about that piece of what the SRO does.
I also don't think we can overlook the budgetary, where the budget comes in to how our SROs are funded, who pays for them. I think maybe not at this stage, but at some stage and some point in the conversation, we do need to make sure we understand and the community understands where the funding is coming from for SROs. And should we decide not to have SROs in the building, but have mental health support or counselors, that funding sources may go away. So I just want to make sure that we include that in the conversation.
And to piggyback off there, maybe that just transparency of like, what is it that we receive as part of it? Is it, we mentioned like this is how many FTEs, but what does that monetarily cost our partners to support us in that way? So as we think about making ask or something different, we can kind of see or be able to just compare how much are we talking about is actually being provided to us. And Mark had a couple comments on here. Love to hear about their efforts, if they're engaged in some, in to reimagine 21st century policing. And what are the objectives of the city and county with the SRO program?
Yeah, just to Mike's comment of what are the topics of discussion you would like to see? Those are a couple. What do the City of Hillsboro Police Department, what do they get out of it? Why do they want to do this program? I think we have an idea. Officer O gave us some insight, but to hear it directly from them, it's we're looking for what to have a conversation of. And some of these, I don't know. Do you have that conversation with the City of Hillsboro or with the police department? I don't know. With the commissioner or the county commissioners or the city councilors or the police department directly. And are we overstepping our boundaries if we talk to the police department directly as opposed to the city council? Yeah, I don't know the politics or protocol of the situation.
Thanks, Mark. I think another question too is just, I mean, to my understanding right now, and maybe knowledge, but maybe clarifying too, but the current MOUs are just like intergovernmental. So I feel like, again, just thinking about why this conversation is at a higher level, because that's from agency to agency. It's not from one department to our whole district, but it's from the whole city. It's just that we're entering into an agreement. And so that's why I'm thinking about this conversation or with the county at a higher level. But also just wondering if it's only for public schools. Do they have any agreements with private schools? Do private schools engage in SRO programs to the degree that public schools do? Or why and why not? I guess it would be a question too.
Right. I just think, like, to Mike's point, I wouldn't want to ask for a meeting with the city council. We just want to talk about SROs, man. I'd like to have these are the topics we'd like to cover.
And also, I think to Fran's point is really this isn't, we're not coming in an adversarial position, or we're coming from and trying to learn more and figure out how does our partnership work better for our students in the ways that they need it. And so really being student-centered and focusing on that to avoid the politicizing of a topic that really should be around what is the best thing for our students and not what the opinions of, everybody in our community. And we've done that really well with other topics that have been really contentious in our community, and staying focused on what is the best thing for our students. So I think if we can do the same thing here and focus on that, and that's how we're approaching that and have those conversations with our partners, that we would have those moments of really reflective thinking, like Fran was saying, where, hey, this is just a first conversation and first meeting. We don't expect that you're going to give us a solution or the answer, or that we're going to know what to do from this moment tomorrow. But this is the starting conversation for us as we are thinking about this and how we reimagine it and how helping us move forward together, instead of, you know, them doing their own thing and us doing our own thing, and then somewhere later we catch up to each other. But I think it's good to start having those conversations. And there's another question from, or comments on our chat, might to capture maybe, or those topics.
Okay, so I think I understand what's next for us. I'm going to continue down the MOU path in case we need it. Also going to request a meeting with I think we should start with the city of Hillsboro, just because we've had a tighter partnership there. And I think we should do that meeting first and then move on to Washington County. Are people okay with that? And that is where a bulk of our SROs come from as well. So if people are good with that, then I will request that meeting. I've captured 9 different potential agenda items. I'm going to group those into 3 or 4 different topics, and then I'll have a conversation with both Robbie and Steve about that prior to the meeting, so that we all understand what we're trying to accomplish that evening. Does that sound right for next steps for this? Everyone good with that? Yeah. All right.
Head nods. Great. Thank you all for your discussion and thoughtful comments. And really, this is something that I just appreciate all of us staying engaged, and also maintaining just being respectful and open to learning and education, and how do we be and do the best for our students. So just wanted to make sure I mention and appreciate all of our staff time that they've done into putting together a lot of this work and research and information. So I appreciate that. So our next item for us is just board discussion time. So I will start with our student reps. And let me see who I see on my screen first. Is Devlin.
All right. So do I start talking, or
Yes, anything that you have to share.
Okay. So just I really only have one thing that I'd really like to bring up, and that's just more related to a general, like, I think that we should do another student survey, because I feel like with the survey that we did before, we only got 123 high school students and 73 middle school students. And I feel like, considering the fact that we're a much bigger district than that, we could do a better job of student representation in that sense. And the way I think that we can go about that is, again, we have advisory class. It wouldn't be too difficult to set up a survey and have them essentially go through that during the advisory period. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out how to formulate this. I just feel like we could just do a better job, especially since, I just feel like we've been doing a good job of keeping the students' point of view in mind. And I feel like the student discussion group that Mike was talking about is definitely a great step in the right direction. I just feel like getting a better idea of everybody's opinion might also be another way to make sure that our voices are still heard. That's really all I have to say. Thank you for everybody who presented, and thank you for everybody for being here. That's all I've got to say, really.
Thank you, Devlin. Ilham?
Yeah, I definitely do agree with Devlin on what he said. Have maybe some more surveys, because I do know a lot of people that didn't actually do it, and it was more of like not everyone knew that it was available. I just think that just overall trying to be an anti-racist community, I know it's going to take a lot of work, because some people it's just a hard thing to come up with things where it doesn't offend anyone, and the fact that we're all trying to do that and be careful at the same time does speak volume. But yeah.
Thank you. Maya?
I just want to start off by saying thank you to everybody. I think all the research, especially on the SRO topic that's being done, is very valuable. And I think we should just continue to keep in mind and make sure that every student at school feels safe.
Thank you, Maya. Mike?
All right. Continuing on that SRO theme, I do appreciate everybody hanging in there with this conversation. This is one of those issues that has there's just a lot of opinions on it, and I think you find both sides will be represented well, and they'll have good reasoning behind their stance. So appreciate that we've all hung in there with this. I think the one thing we have going for us is that without students physically on site, it does buy us some time to continue these conversations and, to Fran's point, be more reflective and take our time with these conversations and come up with the best outcome that we possibly can. So I'm glad that we're allowed that time. I want to take a minute to celebrate the board's evaluation. Greg mentioned that not all evaluations look like that. And it has been, it's just a pleasure working with this board and the thoughtfulness. I think the SRO conversation is a perfect example of the thoughtfulness by which you approach topics. And I just wanted to celebrate that. I'm just so encouraged by the work that you do, and I'm proud to be working with you. I would also like to thank our staff, as this is the week that we are reaching out to families and reconnecting with families, and you heard a little bit about that. We have a number of staff over and over again, our teachers, our classified staff, our administrative team, that throughout the last 5-6 months, they've been on this roller coaster. Are we going to be in school? Are we going to be in a hybrid model? Are we going to be in distance learning? And we've created plans for all of those. And now we are in distance learning, and so we're moving full steam ahead with that. But just the amount of time it's taken to put those plans into place, and the details that have had to be addressed, I'm just so appreciative of all of their efforts. It will not be perfect when we open next week, but when we open in a more full-time manner next week, but we will continue to improve, and you will see a very noticeable difference between what was delivered in the spring and what's happening now. So really thankful for the staff on that. Just a reminder that September 14th is when our typical schedule kicks off in a bigger way. So looking forward to having students back and engaged with us and interacting. So that's what I had today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. For board members, now it's our discussion time. So let's start with Yadira. I'm going for alpha and not in alphabetical order, the opposite way.
All right, I'm looking forward to next week. It's going to be a lot of fun for me. I actually went to go pick up my daughter and nephew's language arts, the new language arts books today, so that we're ready for next week. I'm glad that I was able to adjust my work schedule, so I'll be home during the mornings with them doing online learning. So check in with me after next week, see how I'm feeling. The other question that I have is, I know that the metrics for the counties are different for starting the younger learners versus the other grades. And I know that other districts are having, even those that can start the early learners are having discussions with, can you guys hold on for a second? Just because I know you can hear Emmy in the background. Sorry, thank you. And I know that there are some problems with, like, I guess, coming to an agreement, teachers feeling comfortable coming back into the classroom, even with the little ones, and teaching, and then also some I guess, agreements that need to happen with, like, unions and stuff like that. So I guess, where are we at in this process as far as once Washington County hits those metrics to be able to start the early learners, how ready are we to start that, like get that going? And you don't have to answer right now, but I guess it's just something that I'm throwing out there.
Yadir, if we can put that in the work session for the 22nd, we'd be happy to update you on that. It's kind of an involved answer that changes week to week. So we'd be happy to give you an update though on the 22nd. Does that work for you? Okay.
All right, Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I want to echo Mike's compliments to the staff. It's just an amazing amount of work. If you just look at this agenda, it's packed, and they're all hot button issues that are really hugely impactful in their own right. And we worked through it. And the staff presentation and the thoughtfulness and the thoroughness was evident and really, really appreciated by me. I did have the chance to attend a webinar, actually, and this was NSBA and Cube collaborated, and it was equity, access, and student agency. And so Saida nailed it, not surprisingly. It's about the student's voice and how do you facilitate that? And really it comes down to rethinking teaching. Instead of a teacher-centric model, it's a student-centric model with little pods of learning and getting reluctant learners to engage. I learned a new term, reluctant learners, and students nurturing each other creates a safe place. And the phrase was the brain that's doing the talking is the brain that's doing the learning, and that was pretty powerful. Let's see. The brain that does the work is the brain that learns. And so that was really a re-envisioning the classroom. And they basically said that this is not the teachers that the institutions of higher education are putting out. They're putting out teachers who are really a teacher-centric classroom model, and it's really going to be up to districts to morph that into a student-centric classroom model. And anyway, it was a pretty interesting webinar, and I don't know where HSD is on that journey, but I'm sure we're taking a hard look at it because it certainly seemed very appealing. Thank you, Erica.
Thanks, Martin. Then we have Mark and then Jackie.
Yeah, that was a great webinar. Thanks for summarizing, Martin. It was so aspirational and uplifting by the time you're done. You're like, we can do, like, it may sound hard, but it's not. You can do it. So what do I have? I think Devlin may have the best microphone I've ever heard on any remote call ever, by the way. Maybe send me a link to whatever you're using, because you sound very clear when you speak. I like it. Director Allen and I had the fortunate opportunity to have our first mentoring session with Devlin, safely spaced outdoors, and it was great to finally get a chance to meet and work with our students. We're glad to have you guys on board. If you just weird side note, if you sometimes choose to have your phone read you the board packet instead of actually reading it, it could be a little disconcerting when your phone says 1.8 board members adhere to Oregon public meeting law. What she meant was section 1.8 board members adhere to public meeting law, but she doesn't have any cadence. So when I first heard, I was like, oh no, am I in the 0.8 or am I like the 5.2? So if you have her read it to you, be prepared for a little bit of a. And on that note, very much thanks. We only have 14 people still watching, but very much thank you to the members of the community. You've given us a lot of work to do there in those closing sections, and I look forward to trying to be better.
Thanks, Mark. Jackie?
I echo what Devlin and Maya said about student voices in the survey for SROs. I think it's really important that we try to capture more of those. Other than that, I just want to thank the staff. I know right now with COVID and SRO discussion, and the facility naming, and I mean curriculum. It just goes on and on. It's never ending, and you guys do a lot with a little bit of time. So I appreciate and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackie. I just wanted to mention that I also got we got our call with our with our advisor today, and so I got my daughter and I were able to chat, and I loved how even it's just more of a casual conversation, and I think it just makes it a little bit more accessible. And I was like, yeah, just text me on my phone if you need to like get a hold of me, which is a little bit easier than having that like contact. I think I'm always just looking at like the positive things that all of this is creating, like all these opportunities to have more constant connection and just be in communication with my daughter and having those conversations. So it was a really good experience, and we're getting her the information. She is the one that also needs a Chromebook, and so we're gonna get that squared away. And how nice it was that they even asked, like, hey, is there a school that's closer than the actual high school that you can go to, so you can go and pick it up there instead of having to go to the high school. So that was like super nice to think about that I could just go to Henry instead of having to go to High. So, or have her walk or something. So it was really nice to see that in effect and be experiencing that in real time what we're doing. And I'm really hopeful that everybody's just remains excited to welcome our new school year and then look at all those opportunities that will come with it. I really liked Martin's thought about just remembering to be the student agency and voice is so important, and how do we continue to become that district and be kind of that child's first mentality and thinking about that. And I love that even in our working environment, it's becoming like that, because as we can see, our kids are still living in the background and being here, and we are able to see that dimension and just how they're just part of everyday life in all of our spaces. And so I really enjoy being able to see that and normalizing children in all of these spaces where we're working or, just making decisions about board stuff. And we have, kids being in here with us. So just another great opportunity that this has provided for us. So I thank all of you for your hard work and the time that you put into it. I know that we all are very passionate about our kids in our district and want to make sure that we do the best by them in the different roles that we fulfill. And so I thank you just for engaging and continuing to have these conversations and these moments, like Fran said, for us. I know that after every board meeting, I go and just kind of sit with a lot of the things that I heard and really process. And it's really great to have that, that we are a board and a cabinet and staff that are able to create that dynamic for us, that we feel like we're learning from each other. So we demonstrate that to our community members and to our staff that, we're just lifelong learners, and here we are doing the same thing. So thank you all for that. And with that, I'll leave you, and that concludes our board session. Thank you.
Audrey, are you still on there?
I am.
I don't know. Hold on. Katie's calling me. I don't know enough info. Hello.
She's there.